Hey guys, tonight we settle into the quiet corners of the past, into the stories that whisper instead of shout. We're walking through the faded landscapes of the American Revolution, but we're not looking for the bronze statues or the names carved in marble. We're searching for the ghosts, the figures who moved through the background of history's grand portrait, whose contributions were monumental, but whose names have been lost to the rustle of time. Imagine, for a moment, the heavy wool of a continental soldier's coat, damp with morning dew. Feel the splintered wood of a picket fence under your hand as you watch patrols move down a muddy lane. It's a world without electricity, without antibiotics, and certainly without Wi-Fi. Let's be honest, given the state of 18th century medicine, you probably won't survive this, but the journey is the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small gesture that makes a huge difference. And as always, I love to see where you're all watching from, so please, drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the humid summer air of New Kent County, Virginia. The year is 1781. The air, thick and sweet with the smell of pine and damp earth, feels heavy on your skin. Around you, the world is a symphony of quiet, rural sounds. The distant lowing of cattle, the buzz of cicadas that seems to vibrate in your very bones, and the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood somewhere far off. You are James, and your world, for now, is defined by the boundaries of this plantation. Your legal status is that of property, an enslaved man belonging to one William Armistead. Your days are a cycle of labor under the oppressive Virginia sun, a life devoid of choice, where your future is a line drawn by another man's hand. But the air is also thick with something else, something more than just the coming of another sweltering day. It's thick with the tension of war. The American Revolution, a conflict that has raged for 6 long years, has finally and violently arrived in the South. Red-coated British soldiers, efficient and imposing, are a common sight. Their camps are sprawling cities of white canvas tents, and their generals are plotting the final chess moves they believe will crush the rebellion. You see the scarlet uniforms moving along the dusty roads. You hear the clipped accents of officers giving orders, and you understand, with a clarity born of your position, that great and terrible things are in motion. The ideals of this revolution, liberty, freedom, the rights of man, are spoken in the great houses, but for you, they are a bitter and distant irony. Liberty for whom? Yet, in this cauldron of conflict, you see a sliver of an opportunity. It is a dangerous, almost suicidal path, but it is a path. You have watched, you have listened, and you have learned. You understand the landscape, both physical and political. You know the tangled pathways through the woods and swamps better than any mapmaker, and you understand the subtle hierarchies of the men who believe they own you. With a resolve that feels both foreign and deeply true, you make a decision. You will not be a passive object in this war. You will become a player. With your owner's permission, a detail that feels both absurd and necessary, you walk away from the familiar rhythms of the plantation. You leave behind the life you have always known, and you make your way toward the Continental Army encampment. Your goal is to find the Marquis de Lafayette, the young, fiery French aristocrat who has thrown his lot in with the American cause. Finding him isn't as hard as you might imagine. The American camps are a chaotic mix of discipline and desperation. You present yourself not as a freedom seeker, but as a volunteer, someone willing to help the patriot cause. Lafayette, a man who, despite his noble birth, holds surprisingly progressive views on abolition, sees something in you. He sees your intelligence, your quiet confidence. He listens to your proposal, a plan so audacious it borders on madness. You will not serve as a soldier or a laborer in his camp. Instead, you will walk into the lion's den. You will offer your services to the British. You will become a spy. The transition is unervingly smooth. You make your way to the headquarters of the British General, Lord Cornwallis. You present yourself as a runaway, a man eager to serve the winning side, tired of the Patriots' empty promises. The British, ever in need of local guides and laborers who know the terrain, accept you readily. Your demeanor is perfect, humble, helpful, and utterly non-threatening. You are assigned to the camp of Brigadier General Benedict Arnold, the infamous traitor, whose name is already a curse on American lips. Here, your education in espionage begins. You serve food, you polish boots, you clean quarters, and all the while you listen. You absorb everything. You learn the cadence of camp life, the difference between official orders and idle gossip. You memorize the faces of officers, the numbers of regiments, the condition of their supplies. You become a piece of the furniture, so present that you are invisible. The British officers speak freely in front of you, their conversations about troop strength, planned movements, and strategic weaknesses flowing around you like water around a stone. They see you as a simple servant, incapable of understanding the complexities of their war. This underestimation is the greatest tool in your arsenal. You are a ghost in their machine. Your value becomes apparent quickly. You guide British foraging parties through the countryside, all while taking mental notes of their routes and numbers. You carry messages between British camps, observing every detail along the way, the placement of cannons, the location of supply depots, the morale of the soldiers. You are playing a part, and your life depends on the performance. Every gesture, every word must be perfect. A single slip, a moment of misplaced curiosity, could lead to a swift and brutal end. But you are a natural. The same skills you used to navigate the complex social codes of the plantation now serve you in a theater of war. Soon, your diligence and seeming loyalty get you noticed. You are brought into the personal service of Lord Cornwallis himself. This is the inner sanctum. Now you are not just hearing battlefield gossip. You are at the very center of British strategic planning in North America. You pour wine for the man who commands the most powerful army on the continent. As he and his officers dine, they discuss their plans to trap Lafayette, to move their forces to a deep water port where the Royal Navy can supply or evacuate them. They mention a place called Yorktown. You file away every detail. You create mental maps. You commit conversations to memory. The information you gather is a ticking clock. It is useless unless you can get it to Lafayette. This is the second half of your dangerous dance. You must find ways to slip away from the bustling British camp and meet with other Patriot agents, couriers who will carry your precious intelligence back to the Americans. These meetings are fleeting, held in secret in the dead of night, in dense woods or quiet, out-of-the-way clearings. You pass on what you know, sometimes in scraps of paper with cryptic notes, sometimes through whispered, memorized reports. Historians still argue whether you were a lone operative or the hub of a wider network of spies, but the quality of the information you provided is beyond dispute. You report that the British are fortifying Yorktown, that they are moving thousands of troops there, and that they are awaiting the arrival of the British fleet in the Chesapeake Bay. This is the single most important piece of intelligence of the entire campaign. It allows Lafayette to relay the information to General George Washington. Armed with your intel, Washington and his French allies, under General Rochambeau, see the opening Cornwallis has inadvertently given them. They can abandon their focus on New York City and march their combined armies south. If they can get there before the Royal Navy, they can trap Cornwallis and his entire army. It is a massive gamble, a logistical nightmare that involves moving thousands of men hundreds of miles. But your information gives them the confidence to take it. As the summer bleeds into early autumn, you watch the American and French forces begin to gather, their net tightening around Yorktown. You are still inside the British camp, a vital ear to the ground. You even feed the British false information, procured from Lafayette, about American troop movements to keep them off balance and confused. You are now a double agent, a role so layered with deception, it's a wonder you can keep it straight. It's like trying to play chess on 3 boards at once, in your head, while knowing that a wrong move means you're unceremoniously hanged from the nearest tree. When the siege of Yorktown begins in earnest, the trap has been sprung. French ships have blockaded the Chesapeake, cutting off any hope of British naval rescue. The combined American and French armies, outnumbering the British nearly 2-1, lay siege to the town. The thunder of artillery becomes the new rhythm of daily life. From within the doomed encampment, you witness the British position crumble. You see the confidence drain from Cornwallis's face, replaced by the grim realization that he is caught. On October 19, 1781, it ends. The British bands play a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down," as thousands of red-coated soldiers lay down their arms. It is the decisive victory that will effectively end the war. And you, James, a slave from Virginia, were at the very heart of it. But for you, the end of the war is not the beginning of freedom. You are a spy, not a soldier. A 1783 Act of the Virginia Assembly grants freedom to enslaved men who fought in the Continental Army. But this law does not apply to you. Your service was secret, unrecorded. You are unceremoniously returned to your owner, William Armistead. The world has been turned upside down, but your personal world has snapped back into its old, oppressive shape. It is a profound injustice. You risked everything for the cause of liberty, only to be denied your own. You do not accept this fate. You petition the Virginia legislature for your freedom, but your pleas are initially ignored. For 2 years, you are trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare. Finally, in 1786, you seek out the one man who can truly vouch for the importance of your service. The Marquis de Lafayette, back in Virginia for a visit, learns of your plight. He is outraged. He immediately writes a glowing, detailed testimonial on your behalf. In it, he praises your essential services and your intelligence from the enemy's camp, which were industriously collected and most faithfully delivered. He describes your work as crucial to the American victory. This letter is the key. Armed with this powerful endorsement from a celebrated war hero, you petition the legislature again. This time they listen. In 1787, the Virginia General Assembly passes a special act granting you your freedom. You are no longer property. You are your own man. To honor the French general, who was your champion and patron, you take a new name. You become James Lafayette. You purchase a plot of land not far from where you started, become a farmer, marry, and raise a family. You even become a slave owner yourself, a complex and uncomfortable fact for the modern mind to reconcile, but a reality of the time and place you inhabited. You live out the rest of your long life as a respected farmer, collecting a veteran's pension for your revolutionary service. When the Marquis de Lafayette makes his grand return tour of America in 1824, a national event of immense celebration, he sees you in the crowd in Yorktown, and he recognizes you immediately. The two of you, the French aristocrat and the former slave, embrace on the very ground where your shared intelligence helped win a war. It is a quiet, poignant final chapter to one of the Revolution's most remarkable and hidden stories. Our journey now drifts from the humid fields of Virginia, from the scent of gunpowder and the tension of military encampments, to a different landscape. We move from the war of muskets and bayonets to the war of ledgers and finance, a battlefield no less critical, but one fought with quill pens and stacks of paper. You leave behind the persona of the spy, James, who secured the Revolution's victory, and you now inhabit the body of a man who helped to pay for it. The air here is different. It's the bustling, chaotic air of Philadelphia in the late 1770s. The sounds are of iron-shod wheels clattering over cobblestones, of merchants hawking their wares, of political arguments spilling out of crowded taverns. The smell is a mix of coal smoke, river water from the nearby Delaware, and the tantalizing aroma of baking bread. You are Hames Salomon. You are a newcomer here, a stranger in a strange land, yet you feel the pulse of this city as if it were your own. You arrived in America only a few years ago, a Jewish immigrant from Poland, seeking refuge and opportunity. You carry with you the weight of an old world, but your eyes are fixed on the promise of a new one. You are a polyglot, your mind a fluid tapestry of languages, German, French, Italian, Russian, Polish, and now a proficient English. This ability to converse, to connect, to understand the nuances of different cultures is your greatest asset. It is the key that will unlock doors in this city of merchants and revolutionaries. You find your footing first in New York, joining the Sons of Liberty, your revolutionary fervor aligning perfectly with the patriot cause. Your passion, however, comes at a price. When the British occupy New York, you are arrested as a spy. Your linguistic skills, ironically, save you. The British, specifically their German Hessian mercenaries, need a translator. You use the position to help other prisoners escape and to undermine the British occupation from within. You are caught, arrested again, and this time sentenced to be hanged. But you are resourceful. You manage to escape, bribing a jailer with a handful of gold coins, and you flee to the rebel capital of Philadelphia, arriving with nothing but the clothes on your back. Here in Philadelphia, you must start again. You establish yourself as a broker, a dealer in currency and bills of exchange. It's a profession that relies entirely on trust and reputation, and you build yours meticulously. Your small office becomes a nexus point in the city's financial world. In the newspapers, you advertise your services in multiple languages, a clear signal to the diverse mercantile community that you are a man of international reach. While men like James Lafayette were operating in the shadows of military camps, you begin to operate in the equally murky world of revolutionary finance. The new American government is, to put it mildly, broke. It can print its own money, the Continental, but it has no gold or silver to back it up. The currency is plummeting in value so fast that the phrase, "not worth a Continental," becomes a common insult. It's a financial crisis of staggering proportions. The army needs to be paid. It needs food, uniforms, muskets, and ammunition. Without a stable financial system, the entire revolution will collapse under its own weight, no matter how many battles it wins. This is a quiet, creeping threat, far from any battlefield, but just as deadly. This is where you step in. You find yourself drawn into the orbit of Robert Morris, a wealthy Philadelphia merchant who has been appointed by Congress as the superintendent of finance. Morris is, for all intents and purposes, the nation's first Treasury Secretary, and he has the unenviable job of funding the war effort from an empty treasury. He is the architect, the grand planner, but he needs someone on the ground, a financial wizard who can turn abstract promises into hard cash. He needs you. Your primary job is to take the loans and subsidies that America has secured from its European allies, primarily France and the Netherlands, and make them usable. This isn't as simple as cashing a check. The money arrives in the form of bills of exchange, essentially complex IOUs from the French government. Your task is to sell these bills to American merchants who need to buy goods in Europe. You have to find buyers, negotiate rates, and do so in a way that gets the best possible value for the American government without destabilizing the fragile market. It's a high-wire act performed without a safety net. You work on a commission of a fraction of a percent, a rate far below the standard for such intricate and risky work. Your days become a blur of calculations and negotiations. You sit in your office, the scratching of your quill pen a constant sound, as you manage these enormous sums. You are essentially the government's chief broker, its financial engine. The money you raise pays for the very supplies that equip the army, including the crucial provisions for the Yorktown campaign. There's a direct, unseen line connecting your work in Philadelphia to James Lafayette's espionage in Virginia. Your financial maneuvers ensure that the soldiers Lafayette is helping to position have shoes on their feet and powder for their rifles. You are fighting the same war, just on a different front. But your contribution does not end with your official duties. You see the human cost of this sputtering government up close. The delegates to the Continental Congress, the men tasked with forging a new nation, are often personally destitute. The government has no funds to pay their salaries, and many are far from home, living in expensive boarding houses in Philadelphia. They are the leaders of the revolution, and they can't afford to eat. One of these men is James Madison, a key architect of the future Constitution. He, along with others like Edmund Randolph and Joseph Jones, finds himself with empty pockets. It is here that your personal generosity becomes a quiet pillar of the revolutionary effort. When these men come to you desperate, you give them money, not as a loan shark, charging exorbitant interest, but as a patriot. You provide them with interest-free personal loans from your own funds. You never demand repayment, considering it part of your duty to the cause. You are propping up the nation's leadership with your own checkbook. It's a slightly absurd thought that the future father of the Constitution might have had to go home because he couldn't pay his rent, if not for the quiet assistance of a Polish-Jewish immigrant broker. It's one of those little historical details that reveals how precarious the whole enterprise truly was. Your faith in the cause is absolute. You pour your own considerable fortune into the war effort, buying government bonds and securities that are, at the time, little more than paper promises. You are all in, betting everything you have on the success of the American experiment. You do this while also being a prominent leader in Philadelphia's small Jewish community, helping to finance and build its first synagogue, Mikveh Israel. Your life is a testament to a dual commitment, to your faith and to your new country. Then, just as the war ends and the new nation takes its first shaky steps, your story takes a tragic turn. Your health, broken by your time in that harsh British prison in New York, begins to fail. You contract tuberculosis, and in the damp chill of the Philadelphia winter of 1785, you die. You're only 45 years old. You leave behind a wife, 2 young children, and a chaotic estate. Your death reveals a startling truth. You, the man who handled millions for the government, die virtually penniless. Your personal fortune is gone, swallowed by the revolution. It exists now only as stacks of government bonds and promissory notes, essentially worthless in the nation's post-war economic turmoil. You gave everything, and in the end, you had almost nothing left. And here lies the sad, lingering question of your legacy. Did the United States government ever repay its immense debt to you? Historians and your descendants have long debated the extent to which the new government settled its accounts with your estate. The records are a mess, a casualty of the era's chaotic bookkeeping. Your heirs petitioned Congress for decades, seeking what they believed was rightfully theirs. They argued that the government owed you hundreds of thousands of dollars, a colossal sum at the time. A congressional committee in the 1840s investigated the claim and concluded that it was valid, but no money was ever appropriated. The debt, it seems, was never fully repaid. Your story fades from public memory. Unlike the generals and the politicians, you left no grand monuments. Your legacy was written in the invisible ink of financial transactions, in the quiet survival of a government you helped to keep afloat. Your name becomes a footnote, a ghost in the nation's financial history. A mainstream historical fact is that Robert Morris is remembered as the financier of the revolution, but the quirky and essential tidbit is that his system would have ground to a halt without your daily, tireless, and ultimately thankless work. You were the man who turned the promises of liberty into the currency that paid for it, a quiet hero whose greatest contribution was ensuring that when the bill for freedom came due, there was someone there to pay it. We leave the quiet, ledger-filled office in Philadelphia, where the fate of the nation was balanced on the tip of a quill pen. The scent of ink and old paper fades, replaced by the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. We travel north, away from the nascent nation's urban heart, into the rugged, rolling hills of colonial New York. The year is now 1777. The war is in its third year, and the early optimism has given way to a grim, grinding reality. You are no longer a broker or a spy. You are now 16 years old, and you have just been shaken awake. The world outside your window is a vast, profound darkness, a rural blackness untouched by the glow of any city. You are Sybil Luddington, and the sleep has been chased from your mind by the frantic pounding on your family's front door. It's a sound that carries a unique terror in these unsettled times. In the flickering candlelight of your home, you see him, an exhausted rider, mud-spattered and pale, leaning in the doorway. He brings news from the east. The British are on the move. A force of 2,000 redcoats, under the command of General William Tryon, has landed on the coast of Connecticut. They have marched inland and are, at this very moment, sacking the town of Danbury. Danbury is not just any town. It is a critical supply depot for the Continental Army in the region. It holds thousands of barrels of pork and beef, immense quantities of flour, shoes, uniforms, and tents. For the perpetually undersupplied American forces, the loss of Danbury is a catastrophe. The writer has come here because your father, Colonel Henry Luddington, is the commander of the local militia regiment. He is the man responsible for gathering the citizen soldiers of this sparsely populated corner of Dutchess County. The problem is immediate and obvious. The rider's horse is spent, and the man himself is on the verge of collapse. Your father, a veteran of the French and Indian War, must stay. He needs to plan, to organize the men as they trickle in, to prepare them for a forced march to confront a superior professional army. His men, however, are not gathered in a convenient barracks. They are scattered across miles of rough countryside, asleep in their isolated farmhouses. Someone has to ride out into the stormy night and sound the alarm. Someone has to muster the militia, and that someone is you. There is a beat of silence in the room, the weight of the task settling in the air. This is not a request one makes of a 16-year-old daughter. But these are not ordinary times, and you are not an ordinary young woman. You know the roads, the tangled web of trails and lanes that crisscross this land, better than anyone. You have grown up on horseback. Without hesitation, you agree. You pull on warm clothes, your movements quick and efficient. Outside, a cold, driving rain has begun to fall. You go to the barn and saddle your horse, a sturdy bay named Star. As you lead him out into the miserable night, the responsibility feels like a physical weight. You are given a long stick, a simple branch. It will serve two purposes: to urge Star forward when he tires, and to bang on the doors and shutters of the farmhouses you must visit. It feels flimsy, a ridiculous tool for a mission so vital. Then you are off, plunging into the darkness. The familiar landscape is transformed into a hostile, alien world. The rain plasters your hair to your face and soaks through your cloak, the chill seeping deep into your bones. The road is a river of mud, and Star's hooves slip and slide, threatening to send you both tumbling into a ditch. There is no moon, only the oppressive blanket of storm clouds. Forget a smartphone with GPS. You're navigating by memory and feel, lucky if you don't ride straight into a bog. Your world is reduced to the sound of your horse's labored breathing, the squeak of wet leather, and the drumming of your own heart against your ribs. Your mission is a 40-mile loop, a journey that will take you all night. You ride south first, towards the little hamlet of Carmel. The first farmhouse appears as a dark lump against a slightly less dark sky. You ride up, your heart pounding, and you bang the wooden stick against the door, shouting over the wind and the rain. The British are burning Danbury. Muster at Ludington's. You don't wait for a reply. You can't. You see a light flicker on inside, a sign that your message has been heard, and you are already turning star, urging him back into the night. This becomes your rhythm, your purpose in the storm. Ride, find the house, bang, shout the warning, and disappear again into the blackness. You ride through Mahopac, then swing north towards Kent Cliffs and Farmers Mills. Every shadow seems to hold a threat. This area is part of the neutral ground, a lawless territory between the British forces in the south and the Americans to the north. It's plagued by bandits and partisan gangs, the loyalist cowboys and the patriot skinners, who rob and terrorize travelers. To be a young woman, riding alone at night, is to be breathtakingly vulnerable. Each snap of a twig, each rustle in the undergrowth, sends a jolt of fear through you. The hours wear on. Your body aches with a deep, profound exhaustion. Your legs are numb, your hands raw from gripping the reins and the stick. The cold is relentless. This is certainly not on the standard list of 18th century teenage chores, somewhere between churning butter and mending socks. You are fueled by something more than just youthful energy. It's a fierce, quiet resolve. You think of the town in flames, of the soldiers who will go hungry and barefoot without those supplies. You think of your father counting on you, and so you ride on. The stick in your hand becomes an extension of your will, rapping sharply on window shutters and stout wooden doors. You are a phantom messenger, a voice in the storm. Your cry, "Muster at Ludington's," echoes through the sleeping countryside. Behind you, in your wake, lights begin to dot the darkness as farmers and militiamen wake, grab their muskets, and prepare to march. You are a single moving point of light and sound, activating a whole network of resistance. As dawn approaches, a pale, gray light begins to filter through the rain-streaked sky. You are on the final leg of your journey, heading for home. You and Star are both nearing the limits of your endurance. Every muscle screams in protest, but you can see the familiar shapes of the trees and hills around your family's land. You urge your horse forward for the last mile, and you finally clatter into the yard, nearly falling from the saddle. The scene is transformed. The quiet homestead you left hours ago is now a bustling makeshift military camp. Nearly 400 men, your father's entire regiment, have gathered. They are checking their weapons, forming into companies, ready to march. You did it. You, a 16-year-old girl on a horse, have mustered an army. Soaked, freezing, and utterly spent, you have completed your 40-mile ride. Your father's men would march and engage the British on their retreat, harassing them and fighting at the Battle of Ridgefield, though they were too late to save Danbury itself. Your ride is a heroic, inspiring tale. It's the story of courage, of quiet determination against overwhelming odds. But here, in the soft quiet of our journey, we must also touch on the whispers of history, the questions that linger around your legendary ride. While the British raid on Danbury is a well-documented historical fact, the story of your specific journey is more complex. The first public account of it doesn't appear until 1880, more than a century after it supposedly happened, written by a local historian. There are no known contemporary accounts, no letters from your father, no newspaper articles, no soldiers' diaries from 1777. That mention your incredible feat Paul Revere's ride was recorded almost immediately. He got all the good press. Because of this, historians still argue whether the ride happened exactly as told, or if it was a cherished family story that grew into a local legend over time, a piece of folklore that captured the spirit of a community. This doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen. In a time and place where stories were passed down orally, the lack of written proof is not definitive evidence of absence. But it places your story in a fascinating gray area between documented history and powerful myth. It exists as a testament to the countless acts of bravery, particularly by women, that went unrecorded in the official histories of the war. Your ride, whether it unfolded precisely as the legend says or not, became a symbol of the unseen, unwritten contributions that were the true bedrock of the revolution. You are the ghost rider of the rebellion, a symbol of courage whose story is carried not on paper, but on the wind. The image of a young woman on a rain-swept horse fades, her desperate cry dissolving into the wind. We let the quiet folklore of the New York hills settle, and our journey takes a turn. We move south again, back toward Virginia, but to a different part of it. We leave behind the settled farms and nascent communities and venture toward the edge, the frontier. The air here is sharper, wilder, smelling of untamed forests and the wood smoke from scattered, lonely cabins. The sense of order and society is thinner here. This is a place where a person's reputation is built not with words or wealth, but with fists and raw-boned resilience. You are no longer a messenger or a financier. You are a force of nature. You are Daniel Morgan. And right now, your world is the dusty, rutted track of the Great Wagon Road. You are a teamster, a wagoner. Your youth is a blur of hard labor and harder living. You were born in New Jersey, or maybe Pennsylvania. No one is quite sure, least of all you, and you drifted down to Virginia's backcountry as a young man, seeking work and maybe a bit of trouble. You find both in abundance. You haul supplies, your days measured by the crack of your whip and the straining of your horses. You are big, you are strong, and you have a temper that flares like lightning. You are known more for your prowess in bare-knuckle brawling than for any sort of refined skill. You are, by the standards of the colonial gentry, a coarse and uneducated ruffian. But you are also possessed of a native cunning and an unbreakable will. Your first brush with military life comes during the French and Indian War, serving with the British and colonial forces. It's here that you have an encounter that will define the rest of your life. After knocking down a British lieutenant who had struck you with the flat of his sword, you are sentenced to a punishment of staggering brutality. 500 lashes with a cat o' nine tails. You are stripped and tied to a post. The lash, a whip with multiple knotted cords, tears into the flesh of your back. It is a punishment designed not just to inflict pain, but to break a man's spirit, to kill him through shock and blood loss. But you do not break. You endure. Famously, you would later claim, with a grim frontier wit, that you were only given 499 lashes, and that the British still owed you one. Whether the miscount was real or a defiant joke, the event instills in you two things: a legend for your incredible toughness, and a deep, simmering, personal hatred for the British Army and its methods. You carry the scars on your back for the rest of your life, a permanent reminder of that day. When the revolution begins, you are a different man. You are no longer a rootless brawler. You have settled down, become a respected farmer, even a captain in the local militia. The news of Lexington and Concord reaches your corner of Virginia, and that old fire is rekindled. Congress calls for the formation of 10 rifle companies to support the siege of Boston, and you are commissioned as a captain. You recruit your men from the hunters and frontiersmen you know so well. They are a different breed of soldier. They don't wear the bright uniforms of a European army. They wear practical hunting shirts and carry not the standard, inaccurate, smoothbore brown Bess musket of the British infantry, but the long, elegant, and deadly accurate Pennsylvania rifle. A mainstream historical fact of the era is the profound difference between these weapons. A musket was good for firing in volleys, a wall of lead sent in the general direction of the enemy. A rifle, with its grooved barrel, was a weapon of precision. In the hands of an expert marksman, it could hit a target from 2 or 3 times the distance of a musket. Your men, Morgan's riflemen, are sharpshooters. They can pick off individual officers from hundreds of yards away, a practice the British consider a dishonorable, almost barbaric, form of warfare. You march your company 600 miles to Boston in just 21 days, a remarkable feat of endurance that becomes legendary. Your path through the war is a study in contrasts, brilliant success and devastating failure. You and your riflemen are part of the ill-fated invasion of Canada. In the disastrous attempt to storm Quebec in a blinding snowstorm, you fight with incredible ferocity, taking command when Benedict Arnold is wounded. You push deep into the city streets, but you are ultimately surrounded and forced to surrender. You spend months as a prisoner of war, fuming with impotence. When you are finally released in a prisoner exchange, you return to the fight with a vengeance. Your finest hour, before your ultimate masterpiece, comes in the dense woods of upstate New York in 1777 at the battles of Saratoga. Here, your riflemen, working with other light infantry, are a constant, terrifying menace to the British Army under General John Burgoyne. You don't fight in the neat lines of European warfare. You use the trees for cover. You move like ghosts through the forest, your riflemen's precise fire sowing chaos and panic. You specifically target officers and artillery crews, disrupting the enemy's command and control. Your tactics are instrumental in the American victory at Saratoga, the turning point of the war that convinces France to enter into a formal alliance with the United States. You have proven that the unconventional fighter, the rough man from the frontier, can defeat the best soldiers Europe has to offer. But your greatest challenge, and your most brilliant moment is yet to come. You are promoted to Brigadier General and sent south to join the American Army under General Nathaniel Greene. The war in the South is brutal and chaotic. You are given command of a small, mobile force and tasked with operating in the backcountry of South Carolina, threatening British posts and rallying local militia. In response, the British commander, Lord Cornwallis, detaches his most feared subordinate to hunt you down and destroy you. That man is Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton. Tarleton is the anti-Morgan. He is young, dashing, aristocratic, and utterly ruthless. His British Legion, a mix of cavalry and light infantry in distinctive green uniforms, is known for its speed and its brutality, infamous for cutting down surrendering soldiers at the Battle of Waxhaws. Tarleton's quarter has become a synonym for no mercy. Now he is coming for you. You know you cannot outrun him forever. Your force is smaller and composed largely of unreliable militia, and you yourself are in agony. You are suffering from a crippling bout of sciatica, a searing nerve pain in your back and leg that makes riding a horse sheer torture. You are tired, in pain, and hunted. You have to turn and fight. You choose your ground carefully. A place called the Cowpens, a well-known local pasture land. Here, with your back against a river that cuts off any easy retreat, you devise a plan of stunning ingenuity. It is a psychological trap, a tactical masterpiece born from your deep understanding of both your own men and your enemy. Historians still debate whether your plan was a stroke of pre-calculated genius or a brilliant improvisation based on your knowledge of your troops' limitations, but its elegance is undeniable. You arrange your army in 3 lines. The first line at the very front is a small group of hand-picked sharpshooters. Their job is simple: fire 2 targeted volleys at the advancing British, aiming for officers, and then fall back. Behind them, you place the bulk of your militia. You know the militia. You know they are not professional soldiers. They will fight, but they will break when faced with a disciplined bayonet charge. So, you don't ask them to be something they are not. You walk among them the night before the battle, a big, confident, commanding presence. You joke with them, you explain the plan, and you give them a simple, clear order. You ask them to fire just 2 volleys. Just 2. Then you tell them they are to retreat in an orderly fashion around the left flank of the 3rd line. You are weaponizing their known weakness, turning their predictable flight into a calculated tactical maneuver. The 3rd line, waiting on a small hill, is your corps of veteran Continental soldiers, the hard-bitten professionals under the command of Colonel John Eager Howard. They are your anchor. Hidden behind the hill, out of sight, is your small cavalry force, led by Colonel William Washington, a cousin of the general. The next morning, January 17th, 1781, Tarleton arrives. He is arrogant and overconfident, and he sees your army deployed in what looks like a vulnerable position. He orders an immediate, headlong assault, foregoing any proper reconnaissance. Just as you predicted, the battle unfolds like a perfectly scripted play. Your skirmishers fire their 2 volleys and run. Tarleton's men, sensing an easy victory, cheer and surge forward. They crash into your 2nd line, the militia. The militiamen, as instructed, fire their 2 volleys. The disciplined British line absorbs the shots and continues its relentless advance with bayonets leveled. As ordered, the militia breaks and runs. To Tarleton, this is the classic, expected collapse of an American army. He believes he has you. He orders his men to charge, to break the 3rd and final line and complete the rout. His soldiers, now disorganized and swept up in the thrill of the chase, run headlong into your trap. They charge up the hill and find themselves face to face with your hardened Continental regulars, who meet them with a devastating volley at point-blank range. As the British are reeling from this shock, you give the 2 decisive orders. You command Colonel Washington's cavalry, which has swung around from behind the hill, to charge into the British right flank and rear. At the same time, you ride to the fleeing militia, who have successfully looped around, and you order them to turn and fire into the British left flank. Tarleton's force is suddenly, shockingly, hit from 3 sides at once. The disciplined charge collapses into a panicked mob. The trap is sprung. The battle becomes a rout, but this time, it is the British who are running. In less than an hour, Tarleton's legion is annihilated. It is one of the most complete and decisive tactical victories of the entire war. You, the old wagoner from the frontier, have outgeneraled one of the British Empire's most celebrated young commanders. It is a victory of intellect over arrogance, of frontier cunning over formal training. The pain in your back is forgotten in the exhilaration of the moment. You have turned the world upside down. The dust of the Carolina pastureland settles. The echoes of Daniel Morgan's triumphant orders fade, leaving behind the clean, sharp satisfaction of a battle perfectly won. We leave that moment of brutal clarity behind us now and drift across the vast, cold expanse of the Atlantic. Our journey ends where, in many ways, the Revolution's success began, in the heart of the Old World. You leave the raw-boned frontiersman behind. You are no longer defined by your physical strength or your tactical cunning on a battlefield. Your new weapons are subtlety, persuasion, and the careful management of secrets. You find yourself in Paris. The year is 1776. You are Silas Dean. A few months ago, you were a delegate from Connecticut to the Continental Congress, a former schoolteacher and merchant known for your intelligence and industry. Now, you are something new, something that doesn't officially exist yet. You are America's first diplomat, but you cannot call yourself one. You have been sent by Congress on a mission of the utmost secrecy and importance. Your task is to pry open the coffers of the most powerful monarchy in Europe and channel its wealth and military might toward a fledgling republic founded on ideals that stand in direct opposition to everything that monarchy represents. It's a delicate, almost impossible task. You arrive in Paris not with the fanfare of an ambassador, but under the guise of a private merchant trading on behalf of a fictional company. The city is a dizzying spectacle, a world away from the earnest, sober atmosphere of Philadelphia. The air is a complex perfume of horse manure, baking bread, damp river stone, and the powdered wigs of the aristocracy. You walk along streets where gilded carriages splash mud on the poor, where the soaring beauty of Notre Dame stands just a short distance from squalid, crime-ridden alleyways. This is the center of the Enlightenment, a city alive with philosophy and art, but it's also a city of ancient, tangled politics, a viper's nest of intrigue where spies and courtiers trade in whispers. Your mission is to make contact with the French foreign minister, the Comte de Vergennes. France, still smarting from its humiliating defeat to Great Britain in the 7 Years' War, is eager for revenge. They delight in seeing their old enemy embroiled in a costly and difficult colonial war. But they are not yet ready to openly support the American rebels. To do so would mean another war with Britain, a war for which France is not yet prepared. So, all aid must be clandestine, deniable. You find yourself in a world of shadows and back-channel communications. Your most important contact, your partner in this grand conspiracy, is a man who seems more like a character from an opera than a political operative. And for good reason. He is Pierre-Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais, the celebrated playwright who wrote The Barber of Seville and The Marriage of Figaro. He is also a watchmaker, an inventor, a musician, a financier, and a secret agent for the French crown. He is flamboyant, brilliant, and perfectly suited to this kind of work. Together, you and Beaumarchais create a fake trading company, a shell corporation with the wonderfully theatrical name Rodrigue Hordelez E.T. Company. This company becomes the vehicle for the secret aid. With the secret blessing of King Louis XVI, Beaumarchais procures surplus and condemned arms from French military arsenals. We're talking tens of thousands of muskets, hundreds of cannons, tons of gunpowder, along with tents, uniforms, and shoes. It's a logistical sleight of hand on a massive scale. The goods are funneled through Hordelez E.T. Company, loaded onto ships, and sent across the Atlantic. This is the very equipment that will sustain the Continental Army, the arms that will be used by men like Daniel Morgan's riflemen at Saratoga, enabling the victory that will finally convince France to sign a formal treaty of alliance. You are, without question, succeeding. But success comes at a steep price, and the currency is chaos. The central question of your operation is one that is never clearly answered. Are the supplies from Hordelez E.T. Company a gift from a sympathetic French crown, or are they a purchase that the American Congress will eventually have to pay for? Beaumarchais believes he is owed a fortune. Vergennes and the French government maintain a plausible deniability. You are caught in the middle, trying to keep the ships sailing while navigating a financial black hole. The paperwork is a nightmare. There are no clear 18th century expense reports for starting a revolution. You mix your public duties and your private business, a common practice at the time, but one that opens you up to suspicion. You make promises you have no authority to make, offering military commissions to ambitious French officers eager for glory in the New World, men like Lafayette, von Steuben, and Pulaski, who will indeed become invaluable to the cause. You are getting things done, but you are creating a wake of financial confusion and political IOUs. Your situation is made infinitely worse by the arrival of your fellow American commissioners, Benjamin Franklin, and Arthur Lee. Franklin, already a world-famous celebrity, is charming and politically adept. Arthur Lee, on the other hand, is your doom. Lee is a man consumed by suspicion and jealousy. He comes from a powerful Virginia family and believes he, not a humble merchant from Connecticut, should be the one leading the diplomatic efforts. He sees conspiracies and corruption everywhere. He looks at your frantic, messy, and secretive operations, and he sees not a patriot getting the job done by any means necessary, but a profiteer lining his own pockets. Lee begins a campaign of whispers and letters, sending a stream of poison back to Congress. He accuses you of embezzlement, of betraying the revolution for personal gain. In the factional, distrustful environment of the Continental Congress, his accusations find fertile ground. In 1778, at the very moment the formal alliance with France is signed, the ultimate success of your mission, you receive a letter. You are being recalled to Philadelphia. You are to report to Congress and explain your accounts. You sail for home believing you will be received as a hero. You secured the French alliance, you kept the army supplied, you made victory possible. Instead, you walk into a buzzsaw of political intrigue. You are brought before Congress and interrogated. You are asked to produce records and receipts for transactions that were designed to be secret and deniable. Your key witnesses and documents are an ocean away. You cannot definitively prove that every pound and franc was spent appropriately. You cannot untangle the intentionally tangled finances of Rodrigue Hortalez E.T. Company. Your defense is passionate but ineffective. You are thanked for your service and then dismissed, left in a state of political and financial ruin, your reputation shattered. Embittered and broke, you make the fateful decision to return to Europe to try and gather the evidence to clear your name. You spend years in exile, a man without a country. The war ends, America is independent, but you are a pariah. As your frustration mounts, your judgment clouds. You write private letters to friends, suggesting that America might have been better off reconciling with Britain. It is the rambling of a broken and desperate man, but those letters are intercepted by British agents and gleefully published. The accusations of financial misconduct now harden into the perception of outright treason. The backstabbing you endured has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Years pass. You live in poverty in Belgium and England. Finally, in 1789, the new American government under the Constitution has vindicated some of your claims, and you have scraped together enough money to book passage home, to return to the nation you feel both created and destroyed you. You are in London, staying with a friend. The morning of your planned departure, you are seen happily packing your trunks. You seem optimistic, ready for this final chapter. You eat a hearty breakfast. A few hours later, you are found dead in your room. The official cause is given as a stroke or an unspecified illness. But the timing is too perfect, too convenient. And so your final chapter becomes one of history's quiet, unsolved mysteries. Historians still argue whether your death was what it appeared to be. Was it suicide, a final act of despair from a man who had simply had enough? Was it poison? Had you been silenced by British agents who feared you might expose their networks, or by American speculators who had profited from your financial ruin? Or was it simply the final, tragic collapse of a body and mind worn down by 2 decades of relentless stress and injustice? We will never know. You, Silas Deane, became one of history's most tragic forgotten figures. You were not forgotten for inaction, but for an overwhelming, chaotic, and misunderstood success. Your story is a reminder that revolutions are not clean, ideological triumphs. They are messy, ambiguous, human affairs, full of compromise and sacrifice. Your legacy was written in the disappearing ink of secret agreements, and then tragically overwritten by the permanent marker of political slander. You were the diplomat who secured the tools of victory, only to be cast aside, a broken piece of the very world you helped to build. The French Revolution explained. Settle in, let the noise of your world fade away, and allow your mind to drift backward. Not just a few years, but centuries. Feel the solid ground beneath you soften into the damp, uneven cobblestones of a Parisian street. The air is cool and thick with the smell of wood smoke, river water, and the faint, ever-present scent of baking bread. It is the late 1780s, and the world of old France, the Ancien Regime, is breathing its last shallow breaths, though it doesn't yet know it. You are an observer here, a silent presence drifting through the heart of a kingdom that is, in many ways, a beautiful gilded cage. Before you, society is a grand, intricate tapestry woven from 3 distinct threads. This isn't just a metaphor, it's the law of the land. Everyone you see, from the grandest duke to the humblest street sweeper, belongs to one of three estates. Your eyes are drawn first to the spires of a cathedral, impossibly ornate, piercing the gray sky. This is the realm of the first estate, the clergy. These are the men of God, who hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and perhaps more importantly, own about 10% of the land in France. As you watch a portly bishop step from a handsome carriage, his purple robes a splash of color against the muted tones of the city, you can't help but notice the fine leather of his shoes, which have never known the indignity of a puddle. The church is powerful, its influence woven into the very fabric of daily life, from the tolling of the parish bell that marks your hours to the final rites that will see you out of this world. They are, for the most part, exempt from the state's most significant tax, the taille. It's a rather good deal if you can get it. Then, you feel a shift in the air, a rumble of wheels that commands respect, or at least demands you get out of the way. A carriage, far more ostentatious than the bishop's, rattles past. It is lacquered, gilded, and pulled by four immaculate white horses. Inside, you catch a glimpse of a powdered wig and the glint of a silk waistcoat. This is the second estate, the nobility. These are the descendants of ancient feudal lords, the men and women who own the vast majority of the land and hold all the most important titles in the court, the government, and the military. They too have their privileges, their own set of tax exemptions, and a sense of effortless superiority that radiates from them like heat. You watch as the carriage splashes a curtain of muddy water onto the street, narrowly missing a woman carrying a heavy basket. She doesn't flinch, just adjusts her load and carries on. This is the natural order of things. For the nobility, life is a delicate performance of leisure and influence, played out in the grand halls of the Palace of Versailles. Their powdered wigs, sometimes reaching comical heights, are less a fashion statement and more a uniform of their class, a fluffy white crown declaring they have never had to perform a single hour of manual labor in their lives. And then there is everyone else. You look around you, at the sea of faces in the street. The woman with the basket, the blacksmith wiping sweat from his brow, the lawyer hurrying past with a stack of papers, the beggar huddled in the doorway. This is the third estate. It is a vast, sprawling category that encompasses 97% of the population of France. It is the engine of the nation, the hands that plow the fields, the minds that craft the goods, the shoulders that bear nearly the entire burden of taxation. You feel the collective weight of their existence, the quiet, grinding reality of their lives. They are not a unified group. The wealthy merchant in his fine but not noble coat has little in common with the illiterate peasant. Yet they are bound by what they are not. They are not clergy, and they are not nobility. They have no privileges, only obligations. As you drift through the city, you begin to notice the conversations, the hushed tones in taverns, and the bold pronouncements in public squares. Something is stirring. Little pamphlets, cheaply printed and passed from hand to hand, are becoming more common. They are the 18th century equivalent of a viral social media thread, filled with dangerous, electrifying ideas. Philosophers, men with names like Rousseau and Voltaire, have been writing for decades about concepts like liberty, reason, and the rights of man. They question the divine right of kings, the unchecked power of the church, and the very idea of a society built on inherited privilege. Historians still argue whether the lofty ideas of these philosophers truly filtered down to the average farmer, or if their discontent was far more concerned with the mud on their boots and the emptiness in their stomachs. But here, in the city, you can feel the two currents merging. The philosophical ideals are providing a language, a framework, for a discontent that is becoming impossible to ignore. And that discontent is centered on one thing above all else: bread. You follow the scent of baking to a neighborhood bakery. But the crowd outside isn't queuing to buy. They are gathered in an anxious, murmuring knot. The price of a loaf of bread has nearly doubled in a year. A series of bad harvests, coupled with a government deep in debt and fumbling with economic reforms, has created a crisis. For the people of the Third Estate, who might spend half their income on bread in a good year, this is a slow-motion disaster. It is a gnawing hunger in the belly of the nation. You listen to their talk, the fear edged with anger. They speak of their children, of the injustice of it all, while the nobility, they imagine, feast on delicacies at Versailles. The perception of the royal family is particularly grim. King Louis XVI is seen as a well-meaning but weak and indecisive ruler, more interested in his hobbies of locksmithing and hunting than in the complex troubles of his kingdom. But the real focus of public anger, fairly or not, is his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette. The Austrian-born queen has always been viewed with suspicion, an outsider in the opulent bubble of the French court. Whispers and accusations follow her everywhere. She is frivolous, they say. She is extravagant. She is out of touch. And then comes a story, a scandal so perfectly tuned to this atmosphere of distrust that it solidifies her reputation as the villain of the piece. You hear the tale whispered in a salon, where men and women of the wealthy Third Estate gather to discuss politics and art. It is the affair of the diamond necklace. A scheming countess, a gullible cardinal, and a pair of jewelers created a masterpiece. A diamond necklace of such staggering expense it was worth more than a modern battleship. Through a series of forged letters and a faked late-night meeting with a woman impersonating the queen, they convinced the cardinal that Marie Antoinette secretly wanted the necklace but couldn't buy it publicly. He procured it on her behalf, presenting it to the fraudsters, who promptly disassembled it and sold the diamonds on the black market. When the bill came due, the scandal exploded. The truth, that the queen was entirely innocent and a victim of the elaborate con, was lost in the ensuing storm of public outrage. For the people, struggling to afford bread, the very idea of such an ornament was a profound insult. The story confirmed all their worst suspicions, that the court was a nest of corruption and decadence, with the queen at its center. Her famous and likely apocryphal quote, "Let them eat cake," had not been uttered, but in the public imagination, it might as well have been. The diamond necklace affair hung around her neck like an invisible yoke, dragging her reputation and the monarchy itself further into the mire. So you stand here in the twilight of the Ancien regime, and you feel the immense, precarious tension of it all. The structure of this world, which seems so solid, so divinely ordained for centuries, is beginning to crack. It is groaning under the weight of its own contradictions. A system that lavishes wealth on a tiny, idle minority, while the vast majority who do the work starve. A government paralyzed by debt, largely from expensive foreign wars, yet unable to reform a tax system that exempts the wealthiest. And a new, potent set of ideas that suggest a different kind of world is possible. The air is heavy, not just with wood smoke, but with anticipation. You sense that a single spark could ignite this tinderbox. A push, a bad decision, a moment of defiance, is all that is needed to bring the whole gilded, rotten structure crashing down. The sun is setting on the age of kings, and the night that is coming will be long and filled with uncertainty. The air, you'll recall, was thick with the scent of trouble and baking bread. The vast, disconnected body of the Third Estate was beginning to feel its own collective strength, its own shared hunger. King Louis XVI, from within the gilded bubble of Versailles, feels the tremors. His treasury is empty, his lenders are nervous, and the rumblings of discontent from Paris are growing too loud to ignore. He needs money, and to get it, he must do something no French king has done for 175 years. He decides to summon the Estates General. Imagine a grand, dusty machine, a relic of a bygone medieval age, being wheeled out and cranked back to life. This is the Estates General, a legislative and consultative assembly of the different classes. For the first time since 1614, representatives from all three estates will be called to meet, to advise the king, and most importantly, to approve new taxes. To the king, this is a reluctant, necessary business move. To the people of France, it is a moment of breathtaking possibility. You feel a ripple of excitement pass through the nation. The process begins. Elections are held for deputies to represent each estate. And more than that, the king invites his subjects to compile lists of their grievances, their hopes, their suggestions for reform. These are the cahiers de doléances. Suddenly, everyone has a voice. You can almost feel the collective exhale of a nation that has held its breath for generations. In towns and villages, people gather to draft their lists. The peasants ask for relief from the crushing taxes and feudal dues. The merchants and lawyers of the bourgeoisie ask for fairness, for merit to matter more than birth, for an end to the stifling privileges of the other two estates. They are not yet calling for a revolution, not really. They are asking for a correction, a rebalancing of the ancient scales of justice. Finally, in May of 1789, the chosen deputies arrive at Versailles. You drift among them, an unseen guest at this grand, formal affair. The palace itself is a declaration of power, a sprawling masterpiece of Baroque architecture designed to awe and intimidate. And the opening ceremony does just that. You watch as the deputies of the First Estate, the clergy, enter in their magnificent clerical robes. Then come the nobles of the Second Estate, a riot of silk, plumes, and swords at their hips. And then, Then you see the deputies of the Third Estate. By royal decree, they have been instructed to wear plain, somber black. They are a sea of crows in a garden of peacocks, a deliberate visual statement of their subordinate status. They are even made to enter through a side door. The message is clear. You are here, but you do not belong in the same way. The proceedings begin, but they almost immediately grind to a halt. The core issue, the one that will define everything, is not about taxes or reforms, but about procedure. It is about how they will vote. The privileged estates insist on the ancient method, voting by order. This means each estate deliberates amongst itself, and then casts a single block vote. One for the clergy, one for the nobility, one for the commoners. It's simple arithmetic. The first two estates, whose interests are often aligned, could always outvote the third 2-1. The Third Estate, however, has done its own math. They have more deputies than the other two estates combined. They represent an overwhelming majority of the French population. They demand voting by head, where each individual deputy's vote is counted. In this, you can hear the faint echo of those philosophical pamphlets, the idea that the nation is not a collection of 3 corporate bodies, but a body of individual citizens. For weeks, the debate rages. It is a deadlock, a polite but firm standoff in the grand halls of Versailles, while outside, the price of bread continues to climb. Frustrated and feeling their power, the deputies of the Third Estate decide to make a move. On June 17th, they take a radical, audacious step. Led by compelling voices like the Abbé Size, a clergyman, ironically, who chose to be elected as a deputy for the Third Estate and who authored the hugely influential pamphlet asking, "What is the Third Estate?" His answer, everything. They make a simple, profound declaration. They are no longer the Third Estate. They are the Assemblée Nationale, the National Assembly. They are, they declare, the true representatives of the French people, and they invite the members of the other orders to join them, not as masters, but as equals. This is the moment the ground truly shifts. It is a revolution in vocabulary, a rejection of 1,000 years of history. The king, flustered by this act of defiance, decides to assert his authority. On the morning of June 20th, the deputies of the self-proclaimed National Assembly arrive at their meeting hall to find the doors locked and guarded by royal soldiers. The official reason given is that the hall is being prepared for a royal session to be held in a few days. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine, if clumsy, logistical maneuver, or a deliberate, hostile act by the king to put these upstart commoners back in their place. But in the moment, it feels like a threat. It feels like the beginning of a crackdown. The deputies, a crowd of black-clad lawyers, merchants, and landowners, stand in the street, the morning air damp with rain. There is a moment of confusion, of rising anger. Are they to be dissolved before they have even truly begun? Then, a voice suggests an alternative. They find another space, a building nearby that is large enough to hold them all. You follow them as they walk, their determined footsteps echoing through the royal complex. They file into a structure with high walls and a cavernous, open floor. It is an indoor tennis court, a jeu de paume. The space is plain, unadorned, a world away from the gilded halls where they had been meeting. There is no throne, no tapestry, just a bare room built for the recreation of nobles. A wooden table is dragged to the center. The president of the assembly, Jean-Sylvain Bailly, stands upon it to be seen and heard. And there, in the stark reality of that tennis court, with the light filtering in from the high windows, they make a promise. One by one, the deputies come forward, raising their right hands, their faces etched with a solemn determination. They swear an oath, not to the king, but to each other, and to the nation they now claim to represent. They vow never to separate, and to reassemble wherever circumstances might require, until they have established and written a firm and equitable constitution for the Kingdom of France. It is an act of sublime and peaceful rebellion. It is here, amongst these earnest men, that you might also notice a quiet, thoughtful doctor named Joseph Ignace Guillotin. He is a deputy, a physician, and a political reformer. At this stage, he is known for arguing for more hygienic conditions in prisons and for a more humane, egalitarian method of capital punishment, proposing a simple machine that would behead a condemned person swiftly and without the gruesome spectacle of a botched execution by axe or sword. It is an idea born of Enlightenment ideals of compassion and reason, a footnote in the grand proceedings of the day, a peculiar tidbit that will, in time, cast a long and unnerving shadow over the course of the revolution he is helping to begin. A few days later, the king holds his royal session. He offers some concessions, but declares the National Assembly's decisions null and void, and commands the estates to meet separately. The clergy and most of the nobles file out as ordered. The Third Estate, however, remains in their seats, a silent act of defiance. When the Master of Ceremonies reminds them of the king's command, the fiery Count of Mirabeau, a nobleman who, like Sighs, was elected to represent the Third Estate, bellows a legendary response. "Go and tell those who sent you that we are here by the will of the people, and we will not be dispersed except by the force of bayonets." It is a bluff, perhaps, but it is one the king is not willing to call. Faced with this immovable object, Louis XVI, the absolute monarch, gives in. He sighs, and in a tone of resignation, he orders the wavering deputies of the First and Second Estates to join the National Assembly. It is a stunning victory. The promise made on the tennis court has held. The people, it seems, have won. A constitution is going to be written. But as you drift out from the halls of Versailles and back toward the streets of Paris, you notice something unsettling. Royal troops, mostly reliable foreign mercenaries, are beginning to take up positions around the city. The king may have yielded in words, but his actions suggest he is preparing for another, more forceful move. The air is no longer just filled with possibility. It is now charged with the dangerous electricity of confrontation. The promise made in that echoing tennis court was a victory of words, a constitutional triumph. But back in Paris, the mood is not triumphant. It is anxious. You can feel it in the way people gather, the way conversations stop when a patrol of soldiers walks by. Those foreign mercenaries, remember? The ones the king summoned? They are still here, a ring of steel tightening around the city. The air is humid and heavy with the threat of a royal fist about to slam down on the new National Assembly. The final spark comes not from a cannon, but from a dismissal. The king, perhaps emboldened by his troops or pressured by the hardliners at court, fires his popular finance minister, Jacques Necker. For the people of Paris, Necker was the one man in the government they felt was on their side, the one trying to manage the bread crisis. His dismissal feels like a declaration of war, a signal that the king and the privileged orders are done talking. Panic and fury erupt in the city. Orators leap onto tables in public gardens, their voices cracking with passion, warning that a massacre of patriots is imminent. The people need to defend themselves, but to defend yourself, you need weapons. And so begins a frantic search. You drift along with a crowd as it surges towards the Hôtel des Invalides, a home and hospital for military veterans. They swarm the building and seize tens of thousands of muskets, but they find very little gunpowder. The cry goes up, there is gunpowder stored in the Bastille. Ah, the Bastille, a formidable, glowering fortress on the eastern edge of the city. To you, it looks like something from a dark fairy tale, with its 8 stone towers and imposing walls. For centuries, it has been a state prison, a symbol of the king's absolute and arbitrary power. A place where enemies of the crown could be sent with a secret royal letter, a lettre de cachet, to vanish without trial or appeal. By 1789, it's mostly a relic. It's expensive to maintain, and there are only 7 prisoners rattling around inside its vastness. For forgers, 2 men deemed lunatics, and 1 aristocrat imprisoned at his own family's request. But symbols matter more than facts. To the people of Paris, the Bastille is the physical embodiment of tyranny. And it is gunpowder. On the morning of July 14th, a massive crowd gathers outside the fortress. They are not a trained army, but a chaotic mix of shopkeepers, artisans, and laborers. Their initial goal is not to storm the fortress, but to negotiate for the gunpowder. But the fortress governor, the Marquis de Launay, refuses. The negotiations drag on. The crowd grows larger, more impatient. A small group manages to get into an outer courtyard, and shots are fired. Chaos erupts. What happens next is a messy, bloody, confused affair. It's not a strategic assault, so much as a furious siege born of desperation. The crowd has cannons they seized earlier, but they barely know how to use them. The garrison of the Bastille is made up of a few dozen regular soldiers and some Swiss mercenaries, and they are terrified. After hours of sporadic fighting and nearly 100 dead attackers, the garrison finally surrenders when a group of mutinous royal soldiers joins the crowd with professional artillery. The governor lowers the drawbridge, and the people pour in. The fall of the Bastille is a momentous, thundering crash that echoes across all of France and all of Europe. It is the first great, violent act of the revolution. The 7 prisoners are paraded through the streets as liberated heroes. The fortress itself is ordered to be demolished, its stones sold as souvenirs of vanquished despotism. The king, when told the news, is said to have asked, "Is it a revolt?" A duke famously replied, "No, sire, it is a revolution." News of the Bastille's fall spreads like wildfire into the countryside, but the news arrives distorted, twisted by rumor and fear. This sets off a strange, contagious panic known as the Grande Peur, the Great Fear. You feel this fear as you drift over the sun-drenched fields of rural France. Peasants, already on edge from the food shortages, hear whispers that the aristocrats are sending bands of brigands to burn their crops and steal their grain as revenge. It's not true, but in the terrified imagination of the countryside, it feels plausible. So they arm themselves with pitchforks and hunting rifles. And since there are no actual brigands to fight, they turn their fear and anger on the next best thing, the symbols of their long oppression. They attack the chateaux of the local lords, not necessarily to harm the nobles themselves, who often flee, but to find the feudal charters, the ancient documents that record all the dues, taxes, and obligations they owe. They burn them in great, cathartic bonfires, erasing centuries of servitude in smoke. Back in Versailles, the National Assembly is stunned by the violence in both Paris and the countryside. They realize they are losing control. To restore order, they must prove they are leading the nation. In a single, extraordinary all-night session on August 4th, in a fever of patriotic fervor, noblemen and clergy rise one after another to renounce their own privileges. Feudal dues, hunting rights, tax exemptions. The entire structure of the ancien regime is dismantled, piece by piece, in a torrent of self-sacrifice. They call it the death certificate of the old order. Having torn down the old world, they must now build a new one. Later that month, they produce its cornerstone, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It is a document that hums with the energy of the Enlightenment. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights, it proclaims. It speaks of liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. It declares that sovereignty resides not in the king, but in the nation. It is a document of breathtaking ambition, a promise of a new golden age of reason and justice. But a declaration cannot fill an empty stomach. In Paris, it is now October. The king has still not formally accepted the August decrees or the declaration. The troops have been pulled back, but a new royal regiment has arrived at Versailles, and at a banquet, they were reported to have trampled on the new revolutionary symbol, the tricolor cockade, a rosette of red and blue for Paris and royal white in the middle. Worse, bread is still scarce and expensive. The women of the Paris markets, the poissards, who work tirelessly to feed their families, have had enough. On a rainy October morning, they gather. They are a formidable force, strong, loud, and armed with kitchen knives, rolling pins, and a few borrowed cannons. Their initial target is the city hall, but their focus soon shifts. Their cry goes up, to Versailles. They will go to the king himself and demand bread. And they will force him and his Austrian queen, whom they blame for so much, to come back to Paris, where the people can keep an eye on them. You move with them on the long, muddy 12-mile march. It is a surreal procession of thousands of determined women, joined by men from the National Guard. When they arrive at Versailles, soaked and exhausted, they are a terrifying sight. A delegation is allowed in to see the king. Louis, ever uncomfortable with confrontation, is conciliatory. He promises to provision Paris with grain and to accept the Assembly's decrees. But that is not enough. The crowd remains outside the palace all night. Historians continue to debate whether the Women's March was a spontaneous popular uprising born of desperation or a more orchestrated event, subtly encouraged by radical political factions who wanted the king in Paris. Whatever the truth, in the early hours of the morning, a small group finds an unlocked gate and breaks into the palace, looking for the queen's chambers. Royal guards are killed in a frantic, bloody fight before the National Guard manages to restore some semblance of order. To calm the furious crowd, the royal family is forced to appear on a balcony. The people scream for the queen. Marie Antoinette steps out alone, her children beside her, and simply stands there, bowing her head. Her courage, in that moment, silences the crowd. But they are not appeased. The chant begins again. To Paris. To Paris. There is no choice. The king must agree. And so, the great, lumbering royal carriage is prepared. The procession back to the city is one of the most bizarre scenes in history. At its head are National Guardsmen, some with loaves of bread stuck on the ends of their bayonets. Then come the market women, marching, singing, some riding on the captured cannons. Then the royal carriage, carrying a king, a queen, and their children who are now, effectively, hostages. Behind them, the entire National Assembly follows, having decided they too must move to the capital. The crowd cheers that they are bringing back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy. They are installed in the Tuileries Palace, an old, sprawling royal residence in the heart of Paris. The king is forced to appear before the people, and to show his acceptance of this new reality, he pins the tricolor cockade to his hat. He is no longer the absolute monarch of Versailles. He is a constitutional monarch, a prisoner of his own capital city. The revolution, it seems, has now captured the king himself. And as this new reality settles in, you notice small, strange things. The revolutionary fervor seeps into every corner of life. People begin giving their children revolutionary names, and in a quirky fad, some even begin putting tiny tricolor cockades on their pet cats, turning a simple house cat into a tiny, furry citizen of the new France. The world has been turned upside down, and even the felines are expected to pick a side. The royal family is now in Paris, residing in the Tuileries Palace. Remember the cat with the tricolor cockade? The whole of France, it seems, is now wearing the revolutionary colors, whether by choice or by necessity. For a time, a strange and deceptive calm settles over the nation. The National Assembly works diligently to write its new constitution, methodically building a new France on paper. They reorganize the country into 83 uniform departments, rationalize the legal system, and seize the vast lands of the church to back a new form of paper money, the assignat. It is a period of intense, earnest work, an attempt to build a logical nation from the ground up. But beneath this veneer of constitutional order, the king feels like a caged animal. Louis XVI may have been a weak and indecisive ruler, but he was still a king who believed in his divine right to rule. He found the restrictions on his power, and especially the religious reforms of the civil constitution of the clergy, which made the church subordinate to the state, to be an intolerable offense to God. So, in the dead of night in June 1791, the royal family attempts a desperate gamble. Disguised as servants, they slip out of the Tuileries and flee in a large, conspicuous carriage towards the eastern frontier, where loyalist troops await. Their escape is a masterclass in poor planning. They are slow, they are recognized, and finally, in the small town of Varennes, a local postmaster named Jean-Baptiste Drouet matches the king's face to his portrait on an assignat banknote. The dream of escape is over. The king and his family are captured and escorted back to Paris, but this time, the journey is different. There are no cheers, no cries for bread. The crowds that line the road are silent, their faces cold and hard. It is the silence of profound disillusionment. The king had not just tried to flee. He had tried to flee to the border to link up with foreign armies. He was no longer just a reluctant constitutional partner. In the eyes of many, he was now a traitor. This failed flight to Varennes shatters the fragile trust that remained. The idea of a constitutional monarchy, with Louis XVI at its head, now seems like a farce. Radical voices, once on the fringe, grow louder and more persuasive. The Jacobin Club in Paris becomes the crucible for this new, harder-edged republicanism. Men like the brilliant, intense lawyer Maximilien Robespierre argue that the revolution cannot be safe as long as a king sits on any kind of throne. The situation spirals. France, fearing intervention from the monarchies of Europe, declares a preemptive war on Austria and Prussia in the spring of 1792. The war begins disastrously. The French army is disorganized, and the Prussian forces advance steadily toward Paris. The Prussian commander issues a manifesto, threatening to utterly destroy Paris if the royal family is harmed. It is meant to intimidate, but it has the opposite effect. It fuels the conviction that Louis is in league with the enemy. In August 1792, the radical militants of Paris, the sans-culottes, so named because they wore practical trousers, not the silken knee breeches of the aristocracy, storm the Tuileries Palace. A bloody battle ensues with the Swiss guards defending the king. The royal family survives by taking refuge with the Legislative Assembly, but their reign is over in all but name. The monarchy is officially suspended, and the revolution enters its most radical phase. A new body is elected, the National Convention, and its first act, in September 1792, is to abolish the monarchy and declare France a republic. Now, what to do with citizen Louis Capet, the man who was once King Louis XVI? The convention places him on trial for treason. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. His execution, by a narrow vote, is decided. In January 1793, he is taken to the Place de la Révolution, where a new instrument of statecraft awaits. You can see it, stark against the gray winter sky, the guillotine. The machine that Dr. Guillotin had once proposed as a humane and egalitarian method of execution has become something else entirely. It is the symbol of this new, uncompromising republic. Louis dies with a quiet dignity, attempting to give a speech before being drowned out by a drum roll. The blade falls. A new, terrifying chapter has begun. The execution of the king sends shockwaves across Europe, and the internal and external pressures on the young republic become immense. Foreign armies are invading, and within France itself, regions like the Valais rise up in a massive, bloody counter-revolution. The government in Paris, now controlled by the Jacobins, begins to feel squeezed, paranoid. They believe the revolution is beset by enemies, both outside the borders and hiding within. To save the revolution, they decide, it must be defended by any means necessary. This is the beginning of the Reign of Terror. The National Convention vests enormous power in a small subcommittee, the Committee of Public Safety. Led by figures like Robespierre, it becomes the de facto government of France. Their mission is to preserve the Republic from its enemies, and they pursue this mission with a chilling, bureaucratic fanaticism. The law of suspects is passed, a decree so broad that virtually anyone could be arrested for conduct, associations, or remarks that showed them to be partisans of tyranny or federalism and enemies of liberty. Denunciations become a patriotic duty. A neighbor's grudge, a careless word, a lack of revolutionary enthusiasm could be a death sentence. Historians still argue with quiet intensity whether the terror was a pragmatic, if brutal, response to the very real threats of invasion and civil war, or if it was the inevitable, paranoid fulfillment of an ideology that could not tolerate any dissent from its vision of a perfect republic of virtue. You feel the unnerving quiet of this period. It is not just the silence of the crowds who gather to watch the daily spectacle of the guillotine, but the silence of fear in homes and cafes. The revolution tries to remake everything, to erase every last vestige of the old world. A new, rational calendar is introduced, with 12 months named for the seasons, Brumaire for fog, Thermidor for heat, and each month divided into 3 10-day weeks. This, of course, handily gets rid of Sunday as a day of rest, much to the chagrin of the average worker. A campaign of de-Christianization sees churches vandalized, street names changed if they contain the word saint, and the enthronement of a living goddess of reason in Notre Dame Cathedral. Robespierre, finding this atheistic display a bit distasteful, later tries to replace it with his own state-sponsored religion, the cult of the Supreme Being, a move which struck many of his colleagues as the point where he had perhaps been working a little too hard. The terror is frighteningly effective. It raises a massive citizen army that turns the tide of the war. It crushes internal rebellions, but it also begins to devour its own. Revolutionaries who had once been heroes are accused of being too moderate or too radical, and are sent to the guillotine. Eventually, Robespierre, the incorruptible, becomes the final victim of the paranoia he helped to create. Fearing they will be next, his colleagues in the convention turn on him. He is arrested, and in July 1794, or according to the new calendar, the month of Thermidor, he meets the same fate as thousands of his victims. The fall of Robespierre ends the terror. A wave of relief washes over France. The period that follows, known as the Thermidorian reaction, sees the Republic pull back from the abyss of radicalism. The surviving revolutionaries are tired, cynical, and often corrupt. They establish a new government called the Directory, a 5-man executive committee that lurches from one crisis to another for several years. It is a government of mediocrity, unable to solve the nation's deep-seated economic problems or heal its political wounds. It's the messy, exhausted after-party of a decade of revolutionary fervor. And it is in this atmosphere of political instability and national fatigue that you begin to hear whispers of a name. A young, brilliant, and ferociously ambitious general has been leading the French armies to stunning victories in Italy and Egypt. He is seen as a hero, a man of action and genius in a time of dithering politicians. The nation, exhausted by chaos and bloodshed, yearns for stability, for order, for glory. It is ready for a savior. You can almost feel the stage being set, the lights being adjusted. The long, bloody, and idealistic journey from the tennis court oath has led here, to a moment where the French Republic, born in a cry for liberty, is about to hand its destiny over to an emperor. His name is Napoleon Bonaparte, the intricate etiquette of the Victorian court. Settle back now. Let the day's sharp edges begin to soften. We are going to drift into a world that is not so very far away in time, yet is utterly alien in its customs. A world of gaslight and horse-drawn carriages, of empire and industry, but we are not heading for the factories or the bustling city streets. We're going to the still, quiet center of it all. We are going to the court of Queen Victoria. Breathe in. The air here is different. It carries the scent of beeswax, old velvet, and the faint, clean smell of starched linen. You are standing in an antechamber of Buckingham Palace, and the silence is a living thing. It is a weighted silence, punctuated only by the rustle of a silk gown or the distant, muffled ticking of an ornate clock. This is a place governed by a set of rules so complex, so intricate, that they form an invisible architecture, supporting the very idea of the monarchy itself. And you are about to be presented. Your heart, you'll find, is not behaving as it should. It flutters and thumps against the stiff boning of your corset or the rigid front of your waistcoat. This is not a casual meeting. This is the culmination of weeks, perhaps months, of careful planning, of calling in favors, of intense preparation for a ritual that will last no more than a few minutes, but will define your social standing for the rest of your life. First, you had to get on the list. One did not simply write a letter to the palace requesting an audience. You had to be sponsored. You needed the backing of a person of rank who had already been presented themselves, someone willing to vouch for your character, your family, your suitability to breathe the same air as the Queen. This sponsorship was a critical firewall, designed to protect the court from the undesirable, the socially questionable, and, perhaps most importantly, the newly rich who had the money but not the breeding. The Lord Chamberlain's office vetted every application with a thoroughness that would make a modern security agency proud. Your entire life, your connections, your family tree, all scrutinized to ensure you were worthy. Having cleared that first, formidable hurdle, you then had to consider your attire. And there was no room for personal expression here. The dress code was absolute, a uniform designed to convey respect and conformity. If you are a lady, you are wearing white or a very pale pastel. The gown is cut low across the shoulders, regardless of the weather or your personal comfort. Attached to your waist is a train of a very specific length, no less than 3 yards long, made of silk or satin. On your head, you wear a headdress composed of 3 white ostrich feathers, carefully arranged, along with a fine tulle veil that drapes down your back. It is, to be blunt, an outfit of profound impracticality, designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to be worn in this very specific, very stressful situation. If you are a gentleman, you are likely wearing court dress. This is not your normal evening suit. It is a theatrical throwback to the 18th century. You are in velvet or silk breeches, silk stockings, buckled shoes, a waistcoat, and a coat adorned with cut steel buttons that glitter in the gaslight. A lightweight dress sword hangs at your side, a weapon you almost certainly have no idea how to use, and which seems purpose-built for tripping you at the most inopportune moment. This is not fashion. It is fossilized history, worn as a badge of honor. So you stand, waiting, feeling the weight of the train pulling at your waist, the feathers on your head threatening to list to one side with every nervous tremor. You watch others around you, their faces pale with a similar mixture of anticipation and dread. You have practiced this. Oh, you have practiced. In the drawing room at home, you have rehearsed the single most important physical action you will perform today: the obeisance. For a gentleman, it is a low, formal bow. But for a lady, it is the full court curtsy, a maneuver of deep physical commitment. You have practiced sinking down, keeping your back straight, your head bowed, all while managing that ocean of fabric behind you, so that it doesn't tangle in your feet or knock over a priceless porcelain vase. The goal is a smooth, graceful descent and ascent. The reality, for many, was a terrifying wobble, a moment of profound instability in front of the most powerful woman in the world. Finally, your name is called. The sound echoes slightly in the cavernous room. You walk forward, your steps measured, your gaze fixed not on the Queen, but on the floor just in front of you. To look directly at the monarch before you were formally acknowledged was a breach of protocol. You move into the presence chamber, and the sheer sensory input is overwhelming. The room is a sea of crimson and gold, glittering with crystal chandeliers that refract the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. And there she is, Queen Victoria. She is small, much smaller than you imagined from her portraits, dressed in sober black, a stark contrast to the glittering assembly around her. She is the still point around which this entire universe revolves. The Lord Chamberlain, standing beside her, announces your name in a clear, resonant tone. Now is the moment. You take a breath and perform your curtsy or bow. Down you go, a slow, controlled dip of the body, a gesture of profound deference. And then comes the quirky, and perhaps most difficult, part of the entire ritual. After your obeisance, you must rise and then back away. You cannot, under any circumstances, turn your back on the queen. You must retreat, step by careful step, navigating backwards while dragging that enormous train behind you, your eyes still lowered. It's a bit like trying to parallel park a small boat in reverse, while being judged by the entire British aristocracy. It is a slow, agonizingly long walk until you have reached the designated distance and can finally turn and melt back into the crowd of courtiers. As you stand there, your duty done, a sense of relief so profound it almost makes your knees weak, you can begin to appreciate the sheer theater of it all. It is a carefully choreographed performance, repeated hundreds of times during a court drawing room event. Historians still argue whether this rigid pageantry was primarily a tool of social exclusion, a way for the established aristocracy to police its own boundaries in an era of disruptive new wealth, or if it served a deeper political purpose for Victoria herself. Perhaps she saw this unwavering commitment to tradition as a way of reinforcing the stability and permanence of the crown in a Europe that had seen, and would continue to see, thrones topple. One peculiar tidbit you notice is the fan. For the ladies, the fan was not just for cooling oneself in these stuffy, crowded rooms. It was a vital tool, a shield. It could be used to hide a nervous tremor of the lips, to signal a desire to end a conversation, or, in this context, to give your hands something to do other than fidget. There was a whole silent language of the fan, though much of it is likely exaggerated folklore. But what is certain is that in a world where directness was frowned upon, this little accessory provided a crucial buffer, a small piece of personal territory in a space where every other aspect of your being was on public display and subject to judgment. You have survived the approach. You have entered the gilded cage and performed your part flawlessly. Now you must simply exist within it, hoping, praying, you do not commit some unforeseen blunder in this intricate, exhausting game. You have done it. You have navigated the treacherous journey from the antechamber, performed the deep and precarious curtsy, and successfully retreated backwards without toppling over or catching your train on a courtier's sword. A wave of relief washes over you, so potent it feels like a physical warmth spreading through your chest. You have passed the first great test. You are now officially in. You find a relatively quiet spot to stand, near a potted fern, and for the first time, you allow yourself to actually observe the scene as a participant rather than a terrified supplicant. The presence chamber is a dazzling, overwhelming ecosystem of its own. The air hums with a low murmur of conversation, a polite and disciplined sound, nothing like the boisterous chatter of a normal party. Everyone here is a master of the art of being seen without being conspicuous, of conversing without ever saying anything of substance. It is a performance of immense subtlety, and you are the nervous understudy. Your only goal now is to remain upright, look pleasant, and above all, do not draw unnecessary attention to yourself. But then, you feel a gentle touch on your arm. It is a lady in waiting, her expression one of serene neutrality. Her Majesty has indicated she would like to speak with you, she murmurs, and the pleasant warmth of relief that had settled in your chest instantly evaporates, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline. This is the next level of the game, and it is played without a safety net. As you are gently guided forward, 1,000 rules, warnings you have been given by your sponsor, flash through your mind. The first, the most absolute, the cardinal rule upon which all other courtly conversation is built, is that you do not, under any circumstances, speak to the Queen first. You must wait to be spoken to. This is not a matter of politeness. It is a fundamental law of this universe, as unchangeable as gravity. To initiate a conversation with the sovereign would be an act of social self-immolation, so profound that people would speak of it in hushed, pitying tones for years to come. You arrive at the designated spot, a few feet from the Queen, and you perform another, smaller curtsy. She looks at you, her famous unsmiling gaze taking you in, and then she speaks. Her voice is clear and melodic, but carries an unmistakable air of command. I understand you have recently returned from the countryside, she might say. Now you can speak. The first time you address her, you must say, Your Majesty. After that initial address, for any subsequent answers in the same conversation, you must use the title ma'am. But it must be the right kind of ma'am. Not the broad, flat sound you might be used to, but a clipped, precise sound, pronounced to rhyme with jam or ham. It is a small detail, but in this world, there are no small details. Yes, Your Majesty, you reply, your own voice sounding thin and unfamiliar to your ears. And was the weather agreeable? For the most part, yes, ma'am. We had a little rain towards the end of last week, but it was very welcome for the gardens. And that is the ideal exchange. You have answered the question directly. You have provided a small, uninteresting piece of additional information. You have not offered a strong opinion. You have not complained about the rain. You have not, heaven forbid, asked her if she enjoys gardening. To ask a question of the Queen, any question at all, was simply not done. It was considered impertinent, an attempt to steer the conversation, which was her sole prerogative. You are a conversational tennis partner, but you are only allowed to return the ball. You can never, ever serve. Your entire purpose is to be a pleasant, responsive, and utterly passive participant. It's a bit like being an early, very polite version of a voice-activated smart device. Historians still argue whether this intensely rigid conversational etiquette was a product of Victoria's own personality, shaped by a lonely childhood and a deep-seated need for control, or a deliberate political strategy. By creating such an unbridgeable distance, by making interactions so formulaic, the Queen reinforced the mystique of the monarchy. She was not a person you could chat with. She was an institution you could be granted the brief, terrifying privilege of addressing. As she regards you, you are intensely aware of your own posture. You stand straight, but not stiffly. Your hands are lightly clasped in front of you. You do not fidget. You do not gesture. The Queen might then offer a statement rather than a question. "We are very fond of the Scottish air," she might declare. "Your job now is simple. Agree." "It is indeed wonderful, ma'am." You would not say, "Oh, I much prefer the seaside myself." To contradict the sovereign, even on a matter as trivial as holiday destinations, was unthinkable. The very structure of the language you used had to be deferential. This became particularly acute when it came to any subject of unpleasantness. The Victorian court, especially after the death of Prince Albert, was steeped in a culture of mourning, yet the direct mention of death or serious illness in casual conversation was strictly taboo. One could not say, "I am so sorry to hear your cousin passed away." Instead, you would have to navigate a minefield of euphemisms. You might hear that a person was in very poor health, or that there was sad news from their family. It was a strange contradiction, a world obsessed with the rituals of death that refused to speak its name. If the Queen mentioned a recent bereavement, your role was to look sympathetic, murmur something like, "A great loss, ma'am," and wait for her to change the subject. It was a quirky but essential skill, this ability to acknowledge tragedy without dwelling on its grim reality. The conversation continues for another minute. You answer another question about your family, keeping your answers brief and factual. And then you see it. The slightest, almost imperceptible shift in her gaze. Her eyes move from you to the person standing next to you. It is over. There is no, "It was a pleasure speaking with you, ma'am." There is no, "Thank you for your time." You do not say anything. The moment her attention has shifted, the conversation has ceased to exist. You simply offer another small curtsy and take a half step back, melting into the social wallpaper once more. The entire exchange has lasted perhaps 90 seconds, but it felt like an hour. You spend the next 10 minutes replaying every word in your head. Was my answer too long? Did I use ma'am correctly? Did my voice tremble? You watch as she speaks to the next person, and you see the same mask of calm, focused attention on their face, the same rigid posture. You realize that the entire court is engaged in this collective act of high-stakes, low-content communication. It's a wonder anyone ever found out any news. The goal was not to exchange information or build relationships, but to successfully perform your designated role in the great, unceasing play of the monarchy. And you, it seems, have managed not to forget your lines. A tiny bit of that warmth begins to return to your chest. The worst surely must be over. Until, that is, the summons comes for dinner. The great ordeal of the presentation is behind you. The nerve-shredding 90-second conversation with the Queen has been successfully navigated. You're beginning to feel a cautious sense of accomplishment, a feeling that you might survive the evening. You have found a quiet corner near a large, rather gloomy portrait of a royal ancestor, and are trying to look both distinguished and unobtrusive. Then, an equerry, a man whose entire posture radiates an effortless superiority, materializes at your side. "You are to be seated at the Queen's table for dinner," he informs you, his tone suggesting this is a perfectly ordinary occurrence. For you, it is anything but. The blood drains from your face. This is the final, and in many ways most demanding, trial of the Victorian court, the royal dinner party. You are led into a dining room of staggering opulence. The table is a vast, polished expanse of mahogany, so reflective you could check your hair in it. It is laden with a breathtaking display of gold and silver plate, a forest of intricate candelabra, and porcelain from Sèvres and Dresden. Everything glitters and gleams in the soft, flickering gaslight. The sheer value of the metal sitting on the table could likely fund a small war, or at least keep 1,000 families fed for a year. A footman, dressed in a powdered wig and livery of scarlet and gold, indicates your seat. You are seated below the salt, a good distance from the Queen, and you have never been more grateful for a low social standing in your life. The guests take their seats in a rustle of silk and a clinking of metals. A hush falls as the Queen enters. Everyone rises. She takes her place at the head of the table, gives a small, regal nod, and everyone sits. And now begins the great race against time. The first rule of a Victorian royal dinner is an iron one. The meal moves at the Queen's pace. And Queen Victoria, you quickly discover, was a remarkably fast eater. She had a healthy appetite and saw no reason to linger over her food. The moment a course was placed before her, the clock started ticking. Once she had taken her last bite of a particular course, that course was over. For everyone. Instantly. You watch in a state of controlled panic as a footman places a plate of soup before you. It is a delicate, clear consommé. You pick up your spoon, your hand trembling slightly. You must not slurp. You must not splash. You must eat quickly, but without appearing hurried. You glance up the table and see the Queen is already halfway through her bowl. A sense of urgency, entirely at odds with the serene grandeur of the room, grips you. You manage to get down 3 spoonfuls before you see her place her spoon down with a quiet finality. As if by magic, a footman appears at your elbow and whisks your plate away, whether you were finished or not. That was the soup course. You hope you enjoyed it. Next comes the fish. A beautiful piece of poached salmon. Again, the same silent, frantic race ensues. You take a bite. It's delicious. You take another. You look up. The Queen is dabbing her lips with her napkin. Your half-eaten salmon vanishes. It is a culinary gauntlet, a series of brief, tantalizing encounters with magnificent food that you are given almost no time to actually consume. It is said that one foreign ambassador, new to the court, was so flummoxed by this rapid-fire dining that he was left hungry after several courses. Seeing his plight, a compassionate courtier is supposed to have whispered, "You'd better have a slice of the beef, sir. The Queen is very fond of it, and you'll have a minute or two longer." This strange and stressful procedure was not, as you might think, a piece of deliberate cruelty. It was simply the way things were done, a system that revolved entirely around the monarch's personal habits. Historians still debate the precise origin of Victoria's speedy eating. Some suggest it was a habit from her lonely, strictly controlled childhood, where meals were swift and functional. Others believe it was simply the practical approach of a woman who had an enormous amount of work to get through and saw no need for mealtimes to be drawn-out affairs. Whatever the reason, the effect on her guests was one of constant, low-grade anxiety. Conversation during dinner was, if anything, even more restrictive than in the drawing room. Remember the rule about never speaking to the Queen first? It still applies, but now it is magnified. The Queen would practice what was known as turning the table. She would begin the meal by speaking to the person of highest rank seated to one side of her, perhaps the gentleman on her right. She would converse with him, and only him, for the duration of the first 1 or 2 courses. Everyone else at the table would eat in near silence, speaking only in hushed, brief whispers to their immediate neighbors. Then, halfway through the meal, she would turn. She would physically shift her body ever so slightly and begin a conversation with the person seated on her other side, the lady on her left, for instance. That was the signal. The first conversational partner was now dismissed, and the second was activated. For those seated further down the table, like you, the experience was one of profound silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware and the murmur of the Queen's voice from the far end of the room. It was your job to eat your vanishing food and look as if you were having a pleasant, contemplative time. It's much harder than it sounds. One quirky tidbit about Victorian dining, which became a source of terror at the royal table, was the sheer number of utensils. A bewildering array of forks, knives, and spoons flanked your plate, each designed for a specific food. There were fish forks, oyster forks, salad forks, dessert forks. Using the wrong one was a small but telling sign, that you were not entirely familiar with this world. Many a nervous guest would watch their neighbors out of the corner of their eye, waiting for them to pick up a utensil first, just to be sure. It was a silent test of your social knowledge, another layer of potential humiliation. Finally, after a series of dishes have appeared and disappeared before you in a blur, the dessert course is cleared. The queen takes a sip of water, pushes her chair back slightly, and the meal is over. Everyone rises as she departs. You have survived. You're also most likely still hungry. You might have consumed less food in this grand, multi-course feast than you would in a quick lunch at your club. It is a strange irony to be surrounded by such lavish abundance and to leave with your appetite only partially sated. As you file out of the dining room and back into the drawing room for a final hour of rigid, formal mingling, you realize the royal dinner was not about food at all. It was another performance, another ritual designed to underscore the immense gulf between the monarch and her subjects. Her personal rhythm dictated the pace. Her attention dictated conversation. Her presence transformed a basic human need into an elaborate, high-stakes test of etiquette. It was a powerful and quietly unsettling demonstration of where the real power lay. And it made you wonder what it must be like to live inside this gilded cage, not as a visitor, but as a permanent resident. The great dining room is empty now. The last of the glittering guests have departed, their carriages rattling away into the London night, leaving behind a silence that feels heavier and more profound than the earlier quiet of anticipation. But you do not leave. For you, the evening is not over. You have moved beyond the role of a terrified visitor and have become something else entirely, a member of the royal household. You live here now, inside the gilded cage, and you are about to discover that the intricate etiquette of a single evening is nothing compared to the relentless, unspoken rules that govern every waking, and even sleeping, moment of your life. Your new life is defined by waiting. You are a lady in waiting, or perhaps an equerry. Your primary duty is to be available. You spend hours in beautifully appointed but drafty drawing rooms, waiting for a summons that may or may not come. The cold is a constant companion. The palaces, for all their grandeur, were notoriously chilly, heated by inefficient fireplaces that seemed to consume vast quantities of coal only to produce a small circle of warmth, leaving the rest of the cavernous rooms to the damp and the drafts. You learn to appreciate a good shawl more than a diamond necklace. The first and most important rule of the household is one of profound, almost monastic, quiet. You learn to walk silently on marble floors, to close heavy oak doors without a sound, to speak in low, modulated tones. The queen valued her peace and privacy above all else, and a sudden noise, a loud laugh, an unseemly haste, these were grave offenses. Your existence becomes a study in self-effacement. And then there is the standing. It is perhaps the most physically taxing and symbolically potent rule of them all. You quickly learn that you cannot sit down in the presence of the queen unless she explicitly gives you permission. If she is standing, you are standing. If she is walking through the gardens at Balmoral, you are walking with her. If she is pausing to admire a view for 20 minutes, you are standing beside her for 20 minutes, your feet aching, your back protesting, but your face fixed in an expression of pleasant, patient attentiveness. This rule applied to everyone, from the Prime Minister to the youngest maid of honor. It was an unceasing physical reminder of the hierarchy. You were there to serve, and your comfort was, at best, a secondary consideration. Life becomes a series of these small, constant submissions. You learn to read the queen's moods from the subtlest of cues. The set of her jaw, the tone of her voice when she speaks to her dogs, the way she handles her ever-present dispatch boxes. Your own emotional state is irrelevant. Whether you are tired or ill, or have just received bad news in a letter from home, you must present a serene and cheerful face. The court did not have sick days, only varying degrees of quiet suffering. Historians still argue whether this crushing formality was a genuine reflection of the court's deep-seated devotion to the monarch, or a mask for a kind of institutionalized misery. Were these courtiers willing martyrs to the cause of monarchy, or were they, in their private moments, resentful prisoners of a system that demanded the complete subjugation of their own personalities? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex mixture of duty, ambition, and profound, soul-crushing boredom. The boredom was an ocean. With so much time spent simply waiting, you would think there would be ample opportunity for leisure. But even your leisure was constrained. You could read, of course, but the household library was carefully curated. New novels, especially those of a sensational or morally ambiguous nature, were often frowned upon. Your letters were your lifeline to the outside world, but you wrote them with the quiet awareness that privacy was not guaranteed. Your every action was observed, not just by the queen, but by your fellow courtiers. The royal household was its own intricate ecosystem, with fierce hierarchies and silent rivalries. A casual remark, a perceived slight, a moment of weakness could be noted, reported, and used against you. It was a level of scrutiny that makes a modern office environment look like a freewheeling artist's collective. You learn to be discreet, to be pleasant to everyone, and to trust no one completely. It is exhausting. The day is bookended by royal proximity. The evening is not your own. After the kind of frantic, high-speed dinner you remember so well from your first visit, the court would assemble. The queen might sit at a table, working on her correspondence. The ladies would be occupied with needlework, the gentlemen standing by, ready for a summons. Sometimes a game of cards would be played, but it was a quiet, joyless affair. Laughter was rare and subdued. It was an atmosphere of enforced, respectable tranquility. The main event of the evening for many was simply trying to stay awake without yawning, which was considered terribly rude. One of the few genuine pleasures is the moment you are finally dismissed for the night. You retreat to your own apartments, and the relief is a physical sensation. You can finally sit down. You can remove the stiff, formal clothes. You might even have a small, illicit snack sent up from the kitchens, a simple pleasure after the day's performative dining. You can eat it at your own pace, a luxury that now feels like the height of decadence. Here, in the quiet of your own rooms, you might indulge in a peculiar, fringe hobby that became popular among some long-serving and very bored courtiers. The meticulous collection and pressing of ferns, a fad known as pteridomania, or fern fever. In a life so constrained, the simple, scientific act of finding, identifying, and preserving a plant was a small pocket of personal freedom and intellectual pursuit, a private world away from the relentless public gaze of the court. As you finally settle into bed, the silence of the palace wraps around you once more. But it is a different kind of silence now. It is the silence of a great machine powered down for the night. You are a part of that machine, a small, intricate gear that must be ready to turn again the moment the sun rises. You think of the world outside these palace walls, a world of noise and chaos and freedom, and it feels a universe away. The etiquette of the Victorian court, you realize, was not just about which fork to use or how to bow. It was a complete system for living, a way of ordering human behavior to place one person at the absolute center of everything. And as you drift off to sleep, you are not sure if you are a guardian of that sacred order, or just another one of its exquisitely kept prisoners. The gradual decline of the Western Roman Empire. Settle in. Let the world outside your window fade into a gentle hum. We are going to drift back in time, not to a specific year or a famous battle, but into a feeling, a slow, deep change that crept over a world that believed itself to be eternal. We are going to watch the sun begin its long, almost imperceptible descent on the Western Roman Empire. First, picture the empire at its zenith, perhaps in the age of the Antonines, the 2nd century after Christ. Feel the solid, reassuring stone of a Roman road beneath your feet. It runs in a straight, uncompromising line, connecting a sun-drenched villa in Hispania to a bustling port in Syria. You can travel for weeks, for months, and never leave the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The currency in your pouch is trusted everywhere. The soldiers you see on patrol are a comforting presence, guardians of a secure and ordered world. You can smell the scent of olive oil from the groves of Italy, hear the murmur of Greek spoken in the markets of Ephesus, and see the same statues of the same emperors in a town square in Gaul as you would in North Africa. The world is a single, vast, interconnected organism, and its heart, its unshakable core, is Rome. It feels solid. It feels permanent. It feels like the natural state of things. But now, allow your focus to drift forward a little into the 3rd century. The feeling begins to change. The solid ground beneath your feet begins to feel less certain. The first tremors are felt at the edges, on the endless frontiers. For centuries, the Roman legions were a force of unstoppable expansion. Now they are a force of desperate defense. Along the Rhine and Danube rivers, a vast, shifting constellation of Germanic tribes, Goths, Franks, Alemanni, are pressing against the border. They are not a unified enemy, but a constant, attritional force, raiding, probing, seeking land and plunder. To the east, in the lands of ancient Persia, a new and aggressive dynasty, the Sasanians, has risen. They are a rival empire, organized and ambitious, and they challenge Rome's dominance in the wealthy eastern provinces. The army, that guarantor of peace, must grow larger, more mobile, more expensive. It becomes the single most powerful entity in the state. And the legions, stationed for years in these distant, dangerous frontier zones, begin to realize something. Their loyalty is no longer to a distant, abstract idea of the Senate and people of Rome. Their loyalty is to their commander, the man who leads them in battle, who secures their pay, who promises them a bonus and land upon retirement. And so begins the crisis of the 3rd century. It starts not with a foreign invasion, but with a political implosion. You are standing in a provincial town, and you hear that the emperor has been murdered. This is not shocking news, but he has been murdered by his own troops, who have hailed their general as the new emperor. This new emperor, to secure his claim, must march on Rome. He pulls his legions from the frontier to fight the forces of his rival. The man his rival's legions have also declared emperor. While he is marching, the frontier he just left is now undefended, and a raiding party of Franks pours across the Rhine, burning villages and disrupting trade. This becomes the rhythm of the age. It is a 50-year period where the job of Roman emperor has worse security and a higher turnover rate than being a drummer in a rock band. In half a century, more than 20 men will claim the title, and almost all of them will die violently. They are the barracks emperors, men who rise and fall by the sword. The empire is locked in a relentless cycle of civil war. The solid, straight Roman road is no longer safe. Merchants hesitate to send their caravans. The interconnectedness that was the empire's greatest strength begins to fray. As you wander through a market, you feel the economic consequences in the palm of your hand. The coin you hold feels light, flimsy. To pay the ever more demanding armies, emperors with a life expectancy of a housefly resort to a desperate measure. They debase the currency. They mint new coins with less and less precious metal. An Antoninianus, which once was a respectable silver coin, is now little more than a bronze slug with a thin, deceptive silver wash that rubs off after a few weeks. The state insists that this coin is worth the same as the old one, but no one is fooled. This triggers rampant, runaway inflation. Prices for everyday goods, like grain and oil, skyrocket. People lose faith in money itself and increasingly turn to barter. Your flimsy coin might not be able to buy a loaf of bread tomorrow, but a sack of wheat will always be a sack of wheat. The state, unable to pay its bills with worthless money, begins to demand taxes in kind. They don't want your cash. They want your grain, your leather, your cloth, your iron. Tax collectors become vultures, stripping communities of their resources to feed the insatiable gullet of the military. The small farmer, the backbone of the Roman economy for centuries, is crushed under this burden. He cannot pay. He is forced to abandon his land, or more often, to hand it over to a local magnate, a wealthy landowner with his own private security force who can protect him from the tax collectors. And here you see a quiet but profound social shift, a quirky legal response to this chaos. Landowners become desperate to keep their tenant farmers, their coloni, from fleeing the land and their tax obligations. So the state passes laws that begin to tie these farmers to the soil. They are not quite slaves, but they are no longer free to leave. Their children must work the same plot of land their parents did. It is a slow, creeping change, born of desperation, but you can feel the first stirrings of a new kind of society, a move away from a world of citizens and cities towards a world of serfs and manors. This is a foundational step toward the medieval feudalism that is still centuries away. So you stand amidst this fraying world. For the first time in centuries, the city of Rome itself feels vulnerable. The Emperor Aurelian, a rare competent leader in this chaotic period, even builds a massive new set of defensive walls around the capital, a stark, physical admission that the Pax Romana is over. The confidence is gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing uncertainty. Historians still argue whether this profound crisis was a disease that started from within, a political and economic rot that made the empire weak, or if it was a case of the empire catching an incurable illness from the outside, from the relentless military pressure that broke its political and economic systems. Was it suicide, or was it a death by 1,000 cuts from its enemies? There is no simple answer. All you know, as you feel the chill wind blowing through the broken columns of a provincial forum, is that the world you are in is not the same one it was a century ago. The great, solid edifice of Rome is still standing, but its foundations are riddled with cracks. Someone will have to do something drastic, something radical, if it is not to collapse entirely. The world you are standing in is fractured, exhausted, and profoundly uncertain. Remember the chaos of the 3rd century? The endless cycle of emperors rising and falling, the debased currency, the slow retreat into a barter economy? Out of that long, bloody twilight, a new kind of ruler emerges. He is not a pleasure-seeking aristocrat from an ancient Roman family. He is a soldier, an Illyrian from the Balkan provinces, a man of iron will and grim determination named Diocletian. And he understands that the empire is not just sick, it is dying. He believes that to save it, he cannot merely patch the cracks. He must break it apart and reforge it entirely. Diocletian looks at the vast expanse of the empire, from the misty shores of Britain to the hot sands of Egypt, and concludes that it is simply too big for one man to govern effectively. The problems are too many, the frontiers too long. So he devises a radical solution, a political invention of breathtaking ambition, the tetrarchy, the rule of 4. He divides the empire into an eastern and a western half. He will rule the east as the senior emperor, the Augustus, and he appoints a trusted colleague, Maximian, as the Augustus of the west. But he goes one step further. Each Augustus then adopts a junior emperor, a Caesar, who will be his heir apparent. This isn't just about sharing the administrative burden. It is a direct attempt to solve the succession crisis that had plagued Rome for a century. No more would the legions be able to hail their general as the new emperor upon the old one's death. There was now a clear, established line of succession. It was a logical, almost corporate solution to a very bloody problem. With this new structure in place, Diocletian begins to stabilize the reeling state. He reforms the military, reorganizes the provinces, and overhauls the tax system, making it more efficient, if more burdensome. He tries to tackle the hyperinflation you felt in your hand with that worthless coin. He issues his famous edict on maximum prices, a decree that sets the legal price for over 1,000 products and services, from the cost of wheat to the wages of a lawyer. It is a spectacular failure. It creates a massive black market and drives goods from public sale. But it shows the scale of his ambition, his desire to impose an ironclad order on the chaos. This obsession with order has a dark side. Diocletian wants absolute unity, a total commitment to the Roman state and its traditions. And he sees a growing threat to this unity, the Christians. This religious sect has grown steadily for centuries, and their refusal to participate in the state-sponsored sacrifices to the Roman gods is, in Diocletian's eyes, an act of obstinate treason. He unleashes the great persecution, the most systematic and brutal attempt to wipe out Christianity in the empire's history. Churches are destroyed, scriptures are burned, and believers are forced to choose between renouncing their faith and facing imprisonment or execution. It is an effort to restore the Pax Decorum, the peace of the gods, which he believed had been broken by this impious faith. To symbolize his new, rigid, and remote form of rule, Diocletian and his co-rulers make heavy use of a specific material for their official portraits, porphyry. This is an incredibly hard, deep purple stone, quarried exclusively in Egypt. The famous statue of the 4 tetrarchs, now embedded in a corner of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, shows them as identical, interchangeable figures, their faces stern and abstract, clinging to one another for support. They are not individuals, they are the office. The hard, imperial purple of the stone is meant to convey a message of eternal, unyielding power. But the tetrarchy, for all its impersonal logic, had one fatal flaw. It relied on powerful men willingly giving up power. In 305 AD, in an act that shocked the Roman world, Diocletian did just that. He voluntarily retired to his enormous fortified palace on the Dalmatian coast to, as he famously claimed, grow cabbages. His co-ruler Maximian reluctantly retired as well. The system should have worked. The 2 Caesars became the new Augusti. But the moment the architect of the system was gone, human ambition and family ties, which the system had tried so hard to erase, came rushing back in. The sons of the former rulers felt cheated. The legions had their own favorites. The tetrarchy dissolved into another tangled and vicious series of civil wars. Out of this new chaos, another titanic figure emerges, Constantine. He is the son of a Western Caesar, and after his father's death, his troops in Britain proclaim him emperor. He spends years fighting his rivals, and the final, decisive battle for the West takes place at the Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome. And here, legend and history intertwine. On the eve of the battle, Constantine is said to have had a vision. He saw a Christian symbol in the sky, the Chi, the first 2 letters of Christ's name in Greek, and heard a voice or saw a message, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign you will conquer. He ordered his soldiers to paint the symbol on their shields. They won a crushing victory. Historians still debate whether Constantine's conversion was a genuine act of faith, a profound spiritual awakening, or a brilliant, cynical political calculation. Did he simply see which way the wind was blowing, that this resilient, organized religion was the future, a tool he could use to unify the empire under his own rule? We can never know for certain, but the consequences were world-altering. He, along with his eastern co-ruler, issued the Edict of Milan, which officially ended the persecution and declared freedom of religion throughout the empire. The faith that Diocletian had tried to eradicate was now a legally protected religion. After defeating his last rival and uniting the entire empire under his sole command, Constantine decides he needs a new capital. Old Rome is a city steeped in pagan tradition, its Senate still dominated by ancient aristocratic families who are suspicious of this upstart Christian emperor. He needs a Nova Roma, a new Rome, to be the center of his new Christian empire. He chooses the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium on the Bosphorus Strait. It is a choice of strategic genius. The city sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, controlling the sea lanes between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It is easily defended. Constantine pours immense resources into building his new capital, which he names after himself, Constantinople. He adorns it with magnificent churches, forums, and palaces. He even borrows statues and monuments from older cities across the Greek world to decorate it. He establishes a new Senate here. This act, more than any other, seals the fate of the western half of the empire. The center of gravity, the political, economic, and military focus, has decisively shifted eastward. The East has younger cities, a larger population, and a more vibrant and diverse economy, controlling the lucrative trade routes of the Silk Road and the spice trade. The West, by comparison, begins to feel older, less populated, more rural, and poorer. Its primary job becomes holding the long, increasingly porous Rhine-Danube frontier and shipping grain from North Africa to feed the city of Rome, which is now more of a magnificent, subsidized museum than a true center of power. The great division that Diocletian made a matter of policy has now become a psychological and cultural reality. The two halves of the empire are still connected, but they are drifting apart, sailing on different currents towards very different futures. The great city of Constantinople is now the glittering heart of the Roman world. Its walls are strong, its coffers are full, and its emperor is secure. But you are not there. Your gaze is fixed on the west, where the air feels colder, the shadows longer. The reforms of Diocletian and the new capital of Constantine have, in a strange way, only highlighted the West's mounting problems. It has the longer, more troublesome land borders, the less dynamic economy, and a growing sense of being the junior partner in its own empire. And now, a new pressure begins to build along that long, lonely frontier. Drift with me to the banks of the Danube River, around the year 376. The river is the line, the boundary between the Order of Rome and the vast, unknown lands the Romans called Barbaricum. For generations, Roman soldiers have patrolled this line, and Roman diplomats have managed the tribes on the other side through a careful mix of trade, subsidies, and strategic alliances. But now something is different. A vast crowd is gathered on the far bank. They are not a raiding party, they are an entire people. They are the Goths, the Tervingi to be precise, and they are terrified. They are not fleeing from Rome. They are fleeing towards it. A new and terrifying force has swept out of the vast grasslands of Central Asia, the Huns. They are nomadic horsemen of incredible ferocity, and they are displacing everyone in their path. The Goths, who are themselves a formidable people, have been shattered by the Hunnic advance. And so they have come to the Roman border, not as invaders, but as refugees, begging the Emperor Valens for permission to cross the Danube and settle on Roman lands as allies. They offer to serve in the Roman army in exchange for food and shelter. The Roman officials on the ground see an opportunity. The empire is always short of manpower, both for its armies and its farms. A whole nation of experienced warriors and farmers, delivered to their doorstep? It seems like a perfect solution. After some deliberation, the Emperor Valens agrees. He gives the order to allow the Goths to cross. This is a momentous decision, a mainstream historical fact that marks a critical turning point. This wasn't the usual small-scale settlement. It was the managed immigration of an entire nation. But the execution is a disaster. The local Roman commanders, Lipicinus and Maximus, are corrupt and incompetent. They see the starving Goths not as refugees to be helped, but as a population to be exploited. They are supposed to provide food, but instead they hoard it, selling it to the Goths at exorbitant prices. They even trade dog meat for Gothic children sold into slavery. The situation grows desperate. The Goths, disarmed and starving, are herded into squalid concentration camps, their promised aid never materializing. Finally, the breaking point comes. The Roman commander Lipicinus invites the Gothic leaders to a banquet, a supposed diplomatic dinner. While they are feasting, he attempts to murder their bodyguards outside. The plot fails, the alarm is raised, and the Gothic leaders escape. The betrayal is complete. The starving, abused Goths rise up in a furious rebellion. An entire people, already inside the empire's borders, are now its sworn enemies. The Emperor Valens, furious at the mismanagement, marches from the east with his main field army to crush the rebellion himself. In the summer of 378, near the city of Adrianople, the Roman army confronts the Gothic host. The Romans are overconfident and exhausted from a long march in the summer heat. The battle that follows is one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman history. 2/3 of the eastern army is wiped out. The Emperor Valens himself is killed, his body never found. The Battle of Adrianople is a psychological thunderclap. It shatters the myth of Roman invincibility. It demonstrates that the so-called barbarians are not just a nuisance to be managed. They are a force capable of destroying a Roman emperor and his army. The Goths are now a permanent, hostile presence inside the empire, wandering and plundering the Balkan provinces at will. The emperor's solution, Theodosius, finally pacifies them not by defeating them, but by signing a treaty, a foedus, that gives them land and a high degree of autonomy within the empire. They will fight for Rome, but as a unified Gothic army under their own commanders. The policy of assimilation has failed. Now the policy is accommodation. The army is becoming less Roman, and more a collection of allied barbarian warbands. This sets a dangerous precedent. The border has become permeable. Other groups see that the Romans are weakened, and the pressure mounts. The early 5th century becomes a cascade of breaches. On a famously cold New Year's Eve in 406, a vast coalition of tribes, Vandals, Alans, and Suebi, pours across the frozen Rhine River into Gaul. There is no great Roman army there to stop them. The garrisons have been stripped to deal with endless civil wars and political crises in Italy. These groups are not just raiding, they are migrating, carving out their own kingdoms on Roman soil. And what of the Romans themselves? You see a strange and quirky phenomenon taking hold among the fashionable young men of the aristocracy. They begin to adopt barbarian styles. They let their hair grow long, wear trousers instead of the traditional toga or tunic, and favor heavy furs and jewelry. Moralists and traditionalists are horrified. The Emperor Honorius even passes laws banning the wearing of barbarian attire within the city of Rome. It's a fascinating moment of cultural anxiety, a society simultaneously fearing and being fascinated by the very people who are threatening its existence. It's the ancient equivalent of a subculture adopting the aesthetics of a rival group, a sign of a world where clear identities are starting to blur. Amidst this chaos, one of the most enduring debates among historians finds its footing. What was the true nature of these barbarian invasions? Were they a hostile, destructive conquest that brought down a civilization, as the traditional narrative holds? Or was it more of a slow, messy process of accommodation and transformation, where Roman elites and barbarian leaders often colluded and cooperated, and where Roman political authority gradually gave way to new, localized forms of power? Historians still argue whether this was a violent death or a long, drawn-out process of evolution. The crisis reaches its symbolic peak in the year 410. A Visigothic army, led by their king, Alaric, stands before the gates of Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City is besieged. The imperial government, which by now has permanently relocated to the more defensible city of Ravenna, is unable to send help. After a long siege, the gates are opened by treachery, and Alaric's Goths enter and sack the city. The physical damage is not as great as the psychological blow. The news reverberates across the empire. The sacred center of the world, the city that had conquered an empire, had fallen to a barbarian chieftain. The very idea of Rome, the idea of an eternal, inviolable order, has been shattered. The uninvited guests are no longer at the gate. They are inside the house. The news of the sack of Rome in 410 echoes in your mind. It is a profound, soul-shaking event, but it is not the end. The end is not a single, fiery cataclysm. It is more like a slow, quiet dissolution, a great tide going out, leaving behind isolated rock pools and shifting sands where a vast ocean once was. You are now walking through the final decades of the Western Roman Empire, and the overwhelming feeling is one of emptiness. The emperor is no longer in Rome. He is cloistered behind the marshy defenses of Ravenna, a city on Italy's northeastern coast. The imperial court still exists, a ghost of its former self, still consumed by intricate ceremony and vicious political intrigue, but its proclamations now have very little bearing on the reality of life in Gaul, or Spain, or North Africa. These provinces are, for all practical purposes, gone. The Vandals, remember them from their chilly Rhine crossing? They have swept through Gaul and Spain and have done the unthinkable. They have built a navy, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, and conquered the vital province of North Africa. This is a devastating blow. North Africa was the breadbasket of Rome, its primary source of grain and olive oil. The loss of its tax revenue and its food supply is a wound from which the Western Empire will never recover. So what does Roman authority even mean anymore? In the provinces, power has fractured. It is now in the hands of local strongmen. Some of these are Roman aristocrats, living on their vast, self-sufficient villas, protected by their own private armies, or bucellarii. Others are the leaders of the new Germanic kingdoms, the Visigoths in southern Gaul and Spain, the Burgundians in the Rhone Valley, the Franks in the north. These new kings don't necessarily see themselves as enemies of Rome. In fact, many of them crave Roman legitimacy. They might accept honorary Roman titles from the emperor in Ravenna, stamp their coins with his image, and adopt Roman administrative practices. They want to be part of the legacy, even as their very existence is dismantling it. The real power behind the throne in Ravenna is no longer the emperor himself, but a series of powerful military commanders, the Magister Militum, or Master of the Soldiers. These men are often of barbarian descent themselves, men with names like Stilicho the Vandal or Ricimer the Sueve. They are the supreme commanders of what is left of the Roman army, which is itself now almost entirely composed of non-Roman soldiers. These generals are the kingmakers and the puppeteers. They prop up a series of weak, fleeting emperors, often children, who are easier to control. The Western throne becomes a hollow prize, passed between puppets while the masters of soldiers wield the true authority. You are witnessing the slow death of a complex, interconnected society. The Roman roads, those marvels of engineering, are falling into disrepair. Without a central authority to maintain them, they are no longer safe conduits for trade and communication. A journey that would have taken 2 weeks in the 2nd century might now take 2 months and be fraught with danger. The great aqueducts that supplied the cities with fresh water are crumbling. Urban populations decline. People abandon the decaying cities for the relative safety of the countryside, seeking the protection of a local landlord. The world is becoming smaller, more local, more dangerous. Amid this decay, a quirky and fascinating document survives that gives us a glimpse into the bizarre, twilight bureaucracy of the late empire, the Notitia Dignitatum. It is a list of all the official posts, civil and military, in the Eastern and Western empires. It lists titles like the Count of the Sacred Largesses, the Treasurer, and details the insignia and staff of each office. But for the Western Empire, it reads like a fantasy. It lists Roman officials for Britain, a province that had been abandoned by the legions for decades. It details administrative structures for provinces that are now firmly under Vandal or Gothic rule. Historians still debate the precise nature of this document. Is it an accurate snapshot of the bureaucracy at a specific moment, or is it an idealized projection, a statement of how things should be, a desperate attempt to maintain the fiction of a unified, functioning state long after it had ceased to exist on the ground? It is a profoundly Roman document. Even as the house is collapsing, they are still meticulously documenting the floor plan. And so we come to the year 476, the date traditionally given for the fall of the Roman Empire. But if you are standing in Rome or Ravenna on that day, it is unlikely you would have noticed anything particularly special. The emperor at the time is a young boy, Romulus Augustulus. A nice historical irony, his name combining the mythical founder of Rome with the first emperor. He was placed on the throne by his father, the general Orestes. But the non-Roman soldiers who make up the army demand land in Italy as payment for their services. Orestes refuses, so the troops mutiny. They hail their own commander, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, as their leader. Odoacer captures and executes Orestes and marches on Ravenna. He enters the city, deposes the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, and that's it. There is no great battle. There is no massacre. Odoacer simply pensions the boy off and sends him to live in a comfortable villa near Naples. He then does something very telling. He does not proclaim himself the new emperor. Instead, he gathers the imperial regalia, the diadem, the purple robes, and sends them to the Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. The message is clear. The West no longer needs its own emperor. Odoacer will rule Italy as a king, theoretically under the authority of the one, true Roman emperor in the East. No one at the time would have seen this as the fall of the empire. It was just another coup in a long line of coups. The Senate in Rome continued to meet. The consuls were still appointed. People still went to the chariot races. Life for the average person went on. The Western Empire had been hollowed out for so long that its final, formal end was a quiet, administrative procedure, not a dramatic explosion. The great beast had been dead for a long time. This was just the moment someone finally signed the death certificate. As you stand in the fading light of this late 5th century world, you realize that Rome never truly fell. It just slowly, painfully, and messily transformed into something else. In the coming centuries, its legacy would be carried on by the new Germanic kingdoms, by the enduring power of the Latin language, by the legal traditions that still shaped European law, and above all, by the Christian Church, the one institution that maintained its structure and authority as the secular world crumbled around it. The empty throne in Ravenna is not an ending. It is simply the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter, the long, slow dawn of the Middle Ages.